Chapter 12:26. The classroom was still a little crowded. Even though Yang Yi moved a small stool for Tong Tong to sit between Xixi and Lu Xiaoyu, saving Xixi little butt, the atmosphere in the classroom was still a little stuffy. With so many parents squeezed together, they could not move. Yang Yi only felt a little more comfortable when they went to the physical education class outside the classroom. Today we have a football class. As soon as Mr. Lu Dashan finished speaking, the boys cheered. Of course, the reaction of the boys' parents was different. For example, Wang Leilei's father, Wang Hongwei, who had talked to Yang Yi when he first entered the school, felt that his son was a little too jumpy and would affect the class discipline. He anxiously waved his hand from left to right, like a police officer directing traffic. He motioned for Wang Leilei to be quiet and listened to the teacher carefully. However, Wang Leilei did not notice. He was happily looking up with his buzz cut and laughing. His father was so anxious that he stomped his feet. Little Momo stood with his father and held his mother's hand with his other hand. But he was much more serious than the other little boys. Because the little guy was wearing a cap to block the sun, he could only try his best to raise his little head. His mouth was slightly open as he stared at teacher Lu Dashan, who was talking about how to play football. He didn't know if he could understand, but he was fascinated. Then Mr. Lu Dashan improvised a fancy ball toss. That's right, it was not just a simple toss. He also played with the knee toss, the turn toss, and the back of his head. It seemed that Mr. Lu Dashan had some achievements in football in the past. No wonder he chose football as a lesson for the parents on the open day. Looking at the teacher bouncing the black and white football up and down in a very dynamic manner, not only did Cece and the other students exclaim in surprise, but the parents also applauded. Even little Momo's big round eyes widened as she watched. His little head nodded up and down along with the football. It was obvious that he was fascinated by the game. Of course, Mr. Lu Dashan could not be the only one showing off his skills. Next, the children were in groups of 2. Each group of children held a football and practiced the simplest passing and catching. Yang Yi and Murphy smiled as they watched Xixi and Lu Xiaoyu play football. The 2 girls were new to the game, and they were not good at it. Xixi kicked Lu Xiaoyu, but the ball was deflected to one side. Lu Xiaoyu picked it up with great difficulty and wanted to kick it back to Xi, but she missed. However, the 2 girls still had a lot of fun and were giggling. Even picking up the ball was fun. Little Rascal looked at his older sisters enviously. He felt that what his older sisters were playing was very interesting, but he couldn't join in because his father and mother were worried that if he ran into the crowd, he would be easily knocked down or hit by the ball. Little Rascal could only watch his older sisters play from afar. However, there were also exceptions. The children's passing and receiving of the ball was the same as Cece's. The direction of the kick was very erratic. After a few minutes, a ball was finally kicked over. It rolled on the artificial turf of the football field, and rolled in front of Yang Yi and Mo Fei. Of course, it was not that coincidental. The football was 5 or 6 steps away from them, and it was about the same distance from the other parents. Lance Hao Kai, who was standing on the side, was interested. He ran over with his fat body. Everyone thought that he was going to kick the ball back to the children. However, Lance Hao Kai moved the football back and gently stepped on the grass in front of Tong Tong. "Hey, come kick it back to that big brother," Lance Hao Kai said to Tong Tong with a smile. It turned out that he also wanted to let Tong Tong perform. Seeing this, the anxious little boy, who originally thought that this uncle was going to snatch the ball away, let out a sigh of relief. He stopped in his tracks, scratched his head, and waited there. The parents all looked over and smiled at Tong Tong. After all, Tong Tong was the only child from 2nd grade class 3 who was brought in today's Parents' Day. Tong Tong did not notice the gazes of others. He only saw his father bring the ball over. Then his father smiled and patted his little head, saying, "Go, you can kick it too." How could Tong Tong, who was already very interested, not be unwilling? He did not even feel shy or nervous. He laughed and ran over excitedly. However, Tong Tong did not kick. He just moved forward, hesitated for a moment, then bent down and picked up the football with his 2 little hands. "Use your feet, not your hands." Before Yang Yi and Lance Hao Kai could instruct him, the parents around them all roared with laughter. Some of them, like Wang Leilei's father, Wang Hongwei, shouted anxiously. That's right, using your hands to kick the ball. And it was a deliberate handball. That would get you a red card. Tong Tong picked up the ball and tried his best to throw it to the ground. Of course, he did not throw it very far before the ball stopped. After Lan Hao Kai waved his leg to demonstrate, Tong Tong finally understood. He ran over and kicked with his little leg. Of course, with Tong Tong's small body, it was still very difficult for him to kick the ball well. In the end, Tong Tong used his leg to knock the ball out, and it rolled a few steps away. Okay, that's good enough. Give the ball back to his big brother. Yang Yi walked over with a smile, and gently kicked the ball back to the little boy who was waiting a little anxiously. Then he reached out to pull little Swanee. Oh, ball. Tong Tong was not done playing. He immediately became anxious. He pulled his father's hand and wanted to chase after them. Don't disturb your sister's PE class. If you want to play football, Daddy will buy you a new one when we get home tonight. We can play football at home. You will always have a football to play with in the future. Okay? Yang Yi immediately squatted down and said gently to him. Tong Tong was still hesitating. At this time, a parent ran over and asked the teacher for an extra football and brought it over. Yang Yi, let your son play with it. You can bring it back to the teacher after class. The parent said with a smile. Yang Yi actually did not want to spoil Tong Tong. Today the little boy wanted to sit with his sister and play football. These were all bad behaviors that disrupted the class. If he allowed Tong Tong to do these things, it would give him the false impression that he could get away with it if he made a fuss. In the future, Tong Tong would not be easy to manage. However, the parent had already brought the ball over. Although he was trying to please them, he was still a parent in Shishi's class. It would be unreasonable to reject him. Moreover, Tong Tong had already seen it. If he did not give it to him, it would affect Shishi's class. Yang Yi did not want that to happen. Therefore, Yang Yi took the ball and thanked the parent with a smile before giving the ball to Tong Tong. I'll teach you a lesson when we get home. Does the little monkey still want to overturn the heavens? Yang Yi looked at the little guy who picked up the football again and smiled happily, and thought to himself. Chapter 12:27. Because today was an open day for parents, the school that usually provided a quiet environment for the children's lunch break was still a bit lively. However, the children still returned to the classroom to rest, while the parents did their own activities in the school, and waited for the performance to begin in the afternoon. Perhaps because there were fewer people around Yang Yi and Murphy, a female parent walked over hesitantly. She looked for a long time, and confirmed that Lan Hao Kai and Wu Jingjing didn't separate from Yang Yi's family. She didn't have to wait any longer, and walked to Yang Yi awkwardly. Yang Yi sensed her presence and turned to look at her in confusion. Yang Shi's father, Yang Shi's mother, hello. The female parent also felt that she was a bit rude and quickly introduced herself. I'm Jiang Chen's mother. I talked to you on the phone before. Jiang Chen's mother. In fact, when Yang Yi heard the voice, he also recognized it. He smiled and greeted the other party. Mo Fei also smiled at the other party, but she was not a wily old fox like Lan Zhou Kai, so her smile was a little stiff. Murphy didn't have a good impression of Jiang Chen's name. Last year, she heard from Shishi that this boy was very naughty and often bullied girls. Now that she saw Jiang Chen's mother, she naturally felt a bit emotional. Jiang Chen's mother came over to apologize to Yang Yi and Murphy on behalf of her son. After all, Jiang Chen and his desk mate teased Shishi and Lu Xiaoyu a while ago, causing Lu Xiaoyu's Terabozu to break. Although Yang Yi didn't say anything, Li Rulin still complained to her. I'm really sorry. I'll watch him more closely in the future and won't let him bully girls anymore. Jiang Chen's mother apologized and promised. Yang Yi smiled and patted the head of little rascal, who was looking at the adults with a confused expression, and said, Jiang Chen's mother, in fact, I also understand that boys are naughty when they are young. Today, didn't my youngest son ask for this and that and almost made a scene in class? Tong Tong looked up in confusion when his father patted his head, but his father didn't seem to have any intention of paying attention to him. But sometimes, educating a child isn't just about controlling him. There's also teaching. You have to guide him and let him understand what's good and what's bad. He will also gradually change some of his bad habits. People are born kind, and I believe that Jiang Chen is a good child. Yang Yi comforted Jiang Chen's mother, who was feeling guilty and self-blaming. Although Yang Yi still didn't like the naughty boy and didn't want him to get close to his daughter, Jiang Chen's mother's attitude today made Yang Yi surprised and satisfied. At least, she took the initiative to apologize to him instead of pretending to be deaf and dumb, and afraid of taking responsibility. Lance Haokai also laughed and said, "That's right. Boys do everything when they're young. I remember when I was young, I pulled the ponytails of girls many times. Later, I was scolded by my parents, but after I grew up, I still didn't go astray. The main thing is that parents need to spend more time with their children and give them appropriate guidance." Yang Yi smiled. No matter how busy you are, take some time out to talk to your child and care for him. Your child will definitely be fine. Jiang Chen's mother nodded. Right, where's your husband? I didn't see Jiang Chen's father today. I've seen him before. Yang Yi asked with a smile. He just wanted to change the topic to avoid making the atmosphere too dull. Suddenly, the expression on Jiang Chen's mother's face changed. She stuttered for a while and said with mixed feelings, "He's not free today, so he didn't come." What happened at noon was just a small episode. In the afternoon, after the children woke up, they began to prepare for their performance in a flurry. The costumes that were originally used for rehearsals were moved to the teacher's office in order to make room for the parents. Now Li Ruolin also called the boys who worked hard to move the costumes from her office. Everyone packed up their things and swarmed to the school's gymnasium. "Papa, hurry up, everyone is leaving." The classroom gradually emptied, but Shishi's anxious voice still echoed. It turned out that when Yang Yi came in to find Shishi, he saw that the girl's hair was a bit messy after she woke up, so he offered to help her tie her hair again. The girl happily agreed, but she didn't expect that in the short time it took to tie her hair, the students had already begun to move. Following the footsteps of the boys who went to move the props, many people couldn't hold back and rushed out. Now the only people left in the classroom were Lan Xian's family, who stayed to wait for Shishi, as well as Shishi's deskmate Lu Xiaoyu and her mother. Lu Kong had to go to work and couldn't leave. After Shishi woke up, she was still a bit grumpy. When she saw everyone leave, she also became anxious. Almost there, almost there. Yang Yi quickly sped up the movements of his hands. "Tie a knot here." Murphy, who was on the side, also helped Yang Yi come up with ideas. Don't look at how Murphy was directing Yang Yi. Don't look at how Shishi's hair was tied by Murphy in the past. Yang Yi also asked Murphy for advice. After a few years of practice, Yang Yi's skills could be said to be better than the master. The patterns and speed of his hair tying were already incomparable to Murphy's. Sometimes, when Murphy went out, she even wanted Yang Yi to tie her hair for her. "Shishi, your father is so awesome. He's so good at tying hair." Lu Xiaoyu said enviously as she propped her two small arms on the table and stared straight at Shishi's hair. "Xiaoyu, do you want uncle to tie your hair for you too?" Yang Yi asked with a smile. No, my hair is too short." Lu Xiaoyu shyly shrunk her head and smiled bashfully. In fact, it wasn't short. Lu Xiaoyu's hair was shoulder length. Of course, compared to Shishi's long, dense and shiny hair, it was still a little shorter. At this time, Shishi, who was standing and tying her father's hair, couldn't help but twist her little butt, pout her little mouth and whisper, "We're going to be late." Yang Yi smiled and dismissed the idea of telling Lu Xiaoyu that short hair could be tied up. He quickly tied up Shishi's hair, and everyone went to the gymnasium to meet up with the rest of the team. Perhaps it was because they were in the lower grades, but Shishi's class's performance was in the front. It was their turn to perform third. Therefore, Yang Yi only accompanied Shishi and the others to prepare, telling the sound teacher which music was the third performance and so on. After he was done with all this, he came back to find Murphy. Not long after he sat down, Shishi's performance was about to come on the stage. "How were the first two performances? Were they good?" Yang Yi whispered to Murphy. "They're all singing." The first performance was a little innovative. A few sixth-grade students were singing a barbecue. The second performance was just a simple choir. "It definitely can't be compared to Shishi's performance," Murphy said confidently. "Of course. Why don't you take a look and see who composed the music and songs for their performance? Yang Yi said with a smile. Hee. I heard from Shishi that you didn't participate much in this performance. It was Teacher Li and the music teacher, who were busy rehearsing with the children. Murphy and Yang Yi bickered. Chapter 12:28. While Yang Yi and Mo Fei were talking about the show in a low voice, the announcer had already come up. After all, they were still elementary school children, so their announcers did not have that kind of natural feeling. They just recited the lines stiffly one after another. After some introductions about the snail, they said in unison, "Next, let's welcome all the students of the second grade, Class 3, to present the musical short drama, The Story of the Snail." Beside Yang Yi, many parents clapped their hands excitedly. It was as if they couldn't wait for the whole stadium to know that it was their child's show. Murphy was also a little excited. Although she was a little reserved and didn't clap with all her might, she still smiled and clapped Tong Tong's two little chubby palms. She lowered her head and said to the little guy, "Sister is going on stage. It's Sister's show." After the announcer left, the children in costume came up one by one. The parents in the audience laughed because these second-grade children were too cute. They either dressed themselves up as grass or trees in the background. There were even 5 little boys who carried snail shells on their backs and dressed themselves up as snails. Wang Leilei's father, Wang Hongwei, had been watching from the side. Now he was excited. He pointed at one of the little boys in snail costume and said to the parents beside him, "There, look, the one who is acting as a snail is my son." Soon the music started. The prelude was more cheerful, and Yang Yi had specifically asked Jin Yingming for advice. He added in some elements of blowing instruments, which made the prelude even more interesting. People couldn't help but want to twist and turn when they heard it. In fact, the snails on the stage had already started dancing. Although they weren't performing any particularly outstanding dance, they were just carrying snail shells, gently kicking their legs, left, right, squatting down, crawling up, swinging their arms, and gently jumping. But the relatively neat dance of the 5 people was still very enjoyable to watch. These children are dancing as snails. They are so cute. Below the stage, there were already parents from other classes who couldn't help but laugh and praise. At this moment, the prelude ended, and a young, sweet, and neat singing voice came from the side. "Amen, there's a grape tree in front of you. Anan, the green field has just sprouted. The snail carries its heavy shell and climbs up step by step." Looking in the direction of the sound, everyone noticed that under a mushroom on the left, there were a few girls, singing loudly into a microphone. "I don't think I've heard this song before." Not many parents had such thoughts. Many people would not consider which song they had not heard before, or had not been published before. After all, there were so many songs in the world, and they might not have heard all of them. However, there were still a few people who liked music who briefly had such doubts. What they didn't know was that Yang Yi had come up with a new song for his daughter's praise. Moreover, he had mixed the song, The Snail and the Oriole, into The Snail, to make the storyline of the entire drama clearer. At this time, Yang Yi patted Tong Tong with a smile, and pointed to the big mushroom prop on the stage. "Look, Sister is singing there." "Sister?" Tong Tong looked over in confusion. After a while, he recognized her from afar. When he saw his sister performing on the stage, Tong Tong felt that his sister was amazing. She could even sing on the stage like his mother. Suddenly, the little guy's admiration for his sister increased again. However, the singing and accompaniment stopped here. Jiang Chen's voice came from the backstage. He narrated the story of the snails waking up early in the morning, trying to climb up the tree to eat the grapes on the tree. At the same time, the 5 snails on the stage also cooperated and performed the action of climbing the tree. This short segment was not very exciting, but soon, the music started again. It was still Shishi leading the song. The little girl stood up from under the mushroom tree and sang in a sweet and clear voice. "I want to climb up step by step, and fly forward on the leaf at the highest point. Little sky, shed tears and sweat. One day I will have a sky that belongs to me." Murphy taught Shishi how to pronounce the words. Even now, she could still tell that the little girl's singing was not right. For example, at the end of every sentence, She could not help but drag out the ending sound. Although singing like this was similar to a child singing, in the professional Murphy's ears, she still frowned. She is a bit nervous, Murphy whispered to Yang Yi. Yang Yi squeezed Murphy's little hand and smiled. It's okay, you're already singing very well. You can slowly improve. Don't rush. Only Mo Fei would nitpick. When Cici sang this part of the song, many audience members in the audience applauded. On the one hand, it was because Cici's voice was too sweet as a human's. Moreover, the little girl's voice was soft and intoxicating. On the other hand, it was also because the lyrics were very inspirational, and the adults could hear it. How could they not applaud? She paused for a moment. She took a step back and returned to the children. At this time, the size of the choir, under the mushroom tree, had further expanded. In addition to the original Lan Xian, Chao Ruolin, Lu Xiaoyu, and the others, there were also a few boys participating. Everyone sang the lyrics that she sang just now in unison. There were only a few changes to the lyrics. It seemed that the little guy's 1 month of rehearsal was effective. The songs that Yang Yi had composed for them were all sung to the right beat. After a short pause, this time it was Lan Xian's turn to stand up. Because of her unique voice, the little fat girl had also learned singing from Murphy. Therefore, Lan Xian and Shi were the singers of the second grade class 3. This time, Lan Xian was going to lead the singing of the real opening of Snail. Should I put down my heavy shell and look for where the blue sky is, floating gently with the gentle wind, not feeling the pain of the wounds I have experienced? When Lan Xian stood up, everyone only felt that this little fat girl was a little silly and cute. They didn't think that she would bring any surprises to everyone. However, when Lan Xian opened her mouth, many people's hearts couldn't help but tremble slightly as they listened to her singing. Lan Xian was the most suitable singer for this part of the lyrics. Shi's voice wasn't as loud as Lan Xian's. In contrast, if Lan Xian wanted to sing as loud as her, she would need to spend less effort. Therefore, in this part of the lyrics, Lan Xian didn't sing very hard. However, her voice was clear and audible. It made people feel a kind of tiredness, just like the kind of confusion described in the lyrics. The lyrics in the beginning were very inspirational. It was just like our life. At the beginning, everyone rushed forward as if they were injected with chicken blood. However, when it came to Lan Xian, it seemed that the ideal was reflected into reality. The unreachable end made people feel discouraged and confused. And Lan Xian was able to express this feeling in her voice, which also made her voice full of a deep flavor that other children of her age did not have. Xian air is great. Yang Yi smiled and clapped as he said to Lan Zhoukai. Wasn't that right? In this part, Lan Xian had already amazed the audience. Chapter 12:29. Although Shi and Lan Xian's solo performances were wonderful, the stage now belonged to all the children of the second grade, class 3. After Lan Xian finished singing the first part, the children started singing the most inspirational part again. I want to climb up step by step. One day, I will have my own day. It had to be said that when a group of childish children sang this song together, the impact and positive energy of the song was beyond Yang Yi's expectations. It wasn't just the parents in the audience who were clapping happily. Little Momo, who had been carried over by his father, and was standing on his father's lap to watch the show, also seemed to be intoxicated by it. He giggled as he took off his shoes, and stepped on his father's lap through his socks. His little but even moved along with the beat of the song. After Snail finished singing, of course, the musical was not over yet, because soon the accompaniment changed from mature, gentle and inspirational to light, cheerful, and a little childish. Accompanied by a brisk melody and drum beats, 2 little girls wearing Oriole costumes ran up the stage with a spring in their step. As they danced, they circled around the 5 snails. What's going on? There's an ending? When the parents in the audience saw this scene, the corners of their mouths curled up as they happily watched on. At this time, the choir, under the mushroom tree, started singing again. Ashuashang, 2 orioles, ahihi-ha-ha are laughing at them. The grapes are still ripe. Why are they coming up now? Everyone finally understood how the lyrics were written. It turned out that it was to add an in front of the first two words. At first, many of the parents thought that the song was a dialect of some place. However, with the addition of the the lyrics were more colloquial and catchy. Needless to say, many children were listening below. They might not like the more profound snail, but they would definitely like the song, The Snail and the Oriole. In fact, as they listened, they were already familiar with the melody of the song. When the next section began, some of them even opened their small mouths and happily hummed along. Without stopping, the 2 orioles on the stage stopped, and the 5 snails began to do a slow crawl dance. The choir also sang for them. Ahwang, don't laugh, wait for me to climb it, it will be ripe. At this point, the storyline of the entire story was already very clear. Even the most obtuse parents had figured out the story that the musical was trying to express. Later on, the children repeated Snail and the Oriole. But this was needless to say, when their performance ended, the parents in the audience gave them a warm applause. This applause was much louder than the previous 2 performances. After all, everyone could see whether the performance was good or not, and whether the thoughts expressed were deep or not. Yang Yi came out from the audience and went backstage with Tong Tong in his arms to welcome Xi, who had just finished her performance. Papa brother. Xi didn't need to wear a costume, so she was pleasantly surprised. She happily ran to her father and called him sweetly. You've worked hard. You've worked hard. Yang Yi smiled and opened his right hand to hug Xi. He gently patted her little head. Papa, what do you think of my singing? Xi raised her little head and smiled with her big eyes. She asked expectantly. Of course it's good. If you don't believe me, you can ask your brother. Yang Yi smiled and turned to look at Tong Tong. He asked, Tong Tong, what do you think of your sister's singing just now? Was it good? Tong Tong's reaction was a little slow, but when he figured out what his father was asking, the little guy became excited in his father's arms. He lowered his little head and wanted to look at his sister. He leaned forward. If Yang Yi hadn't held him firmly, he might have fallen down. It's good. Sister. The little guy was so excited that he was at a loss for words. He began to babble in an alien language. No one could understand what words he had created. Only at the end did he say something that everyone could understand. I like it very much. Yang Yi smiled and said, See, Tong Tong said he liked it very much. What about me? What about me? Lan Xian was originally with her father, but at this moment, she came over with interest and asked with a smile. Xian Air's singing is also very good. Your mother Emo said that Xian Air's singing is very professional. If you continue to work hard in the future, your singing will get better and better. Yang Yi said with a smile. No, I want Tong Tong to say it. Lan Xian shook her head and said ungratefully. Yang Yi was stunned for a moment. He looked at Lan's Hao Kai and shook his head with a bitter smile. Huijia Primary School's parents' open house. For Yang Yi and the others, after Xi's performance, it was considered to be over. Although everyone still patiently watched the other performances, they were after all children's performances. Without Yang Yi's support, how could they be as good as Xi's performance? In fact, with Xi's program at the front, the other programs became a little plain and unremarkable. Although there wasn't an award for this performance, everyone knew that the second grade, Class 3's musical was the best. They just didn't know if the teacher in charge of the program would regret putting Xi's program at the front of the list. Since it was a public performance, there were many parents in the stadium. Some of them used their phones or other tools to record Xi's performance. Although their original intention was to record their own children's performance, but when they saw that the third performance was so good, they decided to record it at the last minute. Soon, the video was uploaded onto the internet. Before the reporters even caught wind of it, the video had already become popular on the internet because of the 2 unusual nursery rhymes. Not only were they pleasant to listen to, but they were also filled with positive energy. It was very easy to like, so it quickly spread online and became popular. On the 3rd day after the parents' open house, this video had become a hot topic on micro-broadcasting. In the process of spreading, many musicians became curious about the 2 songs. Who wrote it? How generous. Such nice songs were directly used for a group of children's performances. Of course, it didn't take long for this doubt to be resolved by the resourceful reporters. On the afternoon of the third day, the media reported it. They found out that this video was taken during the parents' open house at Jiangqing City's Huijia Primary School. Don't you think the name Huijia Primary School is very familiar? That's right, Yang Yi and Murphy's daughter, Yang Shi, is studying there. And this video is XX minutes and XX seconds. The little girl who stood up to sing is Yang Shi. At this point, it shouldn't be difficult for everyone to guess who the composer of these songs is, right? Yang Yi had written 2 songs for his daughter's performance. Although this news did not make the headlines, it was quite popular on the internet. Many people clicked on it to see what Yang Yi had done because of this title. Even many netizens who were not interested in children's songs and videos in the past went to watch this video because of Yang Yi's name. The songs are great. I didn't expect Yang Yi's attainments in children's songs to be so high, but I'm still envious of Shishi. She has such a doting father, and she's so talented. The netizens praised and envied under the comments of the report. Chapter 12:30. There was only one day of open house for parents. After all the hustle and bustle was over, the campus of Huijia Primary School returned to tranquility. However, according to Shishi's excited little report, when she came back at night, Yang Yi knew that the 2 songs he performed for them were still popular among the children. In comparison, The Snail, which had a deep meaning and a more adult singing style, was not as popular as The Snail and the Oriole, which had a light style and a happy melody. Today, Papa, let me tell you, when we went to Sister Xiaowei's 4th grade class to play, we heard a few 4th grade sisters singing. Meant there's a grape tree in front of me, a nun's green field just sprouted. Then they sang wrong, they sang sprouting. Hee hee. She even inquired about the situation of the senior sisters. In the car, she beamed with joy and told her father, "Did you tell them that they sang wrong?" Yang Yi asked with a smile. "Yes, I did." At the mention of this, Cici became even happier. She giggled and said, "When I told them how to sing it, they still felt that it wasn't right. They said that what they heard last week was sprouting. Papa, they didn't recognize that we were singing." Hee hee. Lan Xian was also there at that time. She laughed proudly with Shishi and said, "Yes." Later, when we told them that we were the singers, they didn't dare to believe it. Then I sang it for them and they recognized me. It was obvious that performing a good show that was well known in the school brought a high sense of achievement to the 2 girls. Of course, the interesting things that happened to the girls in school did not stop at these 2 songs. After all, no matter how popular a song was, it would lose its popularity one day. Time passed day by day, and gradually it was November. As the Truman World had finished filming, Yang Yi needed to attend the wrap party and press conference, so Murphy was at home to take care of the children. However, in the morning, Murphy accidentally woke up late again. She hurriedly woke up Shishi, tidied up the little girl, who was still in a daze, and finally sent her to Lan Xian's house. Fortunately, Grandma Wu knew that Shishi had woken up late, so she packed breakfast for the little girl and let her eat it in the car. Shishi and Lan Xian took Lan Xian's chauffeur to go to school. They didn't set out late, and they arrived at school on time. But the problem left behind by Mo Fei in a hurry finally appeared during the class. As she woke up late, Murphy didn't have time to braid Shishi's hair. She just tied the little girl's hair into a ponytail, and the little girl's long bangs fell down like a brush. Usually, Shishi didn't feel that it was too much of a hindrance, and she just shook her head. However, when it came to class, Shishi realized that her bangs were a little naughty. They always fell in front of her eyes and blocked her view. Even if Shishi lifted it up, it didn't take long for it to fall back down like a fallen leaf in autumn. Aya! Cici pouted her small mouth in annoyance. She pouted her lower lip and let out a sigh as if she was very discouraged. Then she blew out a breath, causing her irritating bangs to fly up. However, it fell down again after a while. At this time, Lu Xiaoyu, who was sitting beside Shishi, finally noticed that Shishi was moving. One had to know that Shishi was usually very serious in class. Why would she move around? Lu Xiaoyu blinked her eyes in confusion and asked softly, Shishi, what's wrong with you? Shishi pouted her little mouth and explained to Lu Xiaoyu, Little fishy, I didn't bring a hair clip, and my hair fell down. It's so uncomfortable. The two little girls were still whispering to each other. Oh right, little fishy, do you still have a hair clip? Shishi asked as she looked at Lu Xiaoyu expectantly. Lu Xiaoyu shook her head. Her hair wasn't very long, but soon Lu Xiaoyu's eyes lit up. In her excitement, she raised her voice slightly and said, Yes, Shishi, I still have 2 hair cords. Do you want them? Girls didn't have much else, but they usually had several hair cords. Lu Xiaoyu opened her pencil box and took out the top layer. Then, she took out the hair cords that were almost stuck together from the eraser below. This won't work. I need a hair clip. Shishi looked at it and shook her head regretfully. Shishi didn't know that the hair cords could still be used. For example, she could tie them up and make them look like an apple. However, just as the two little girls were obsessed with finding a solution to Shishi's bangs, the classroom unknowingly quieted down. Many students were holding back their laughter and looking at Shishi and the others with laughter. Yangshi, Lu Xiaoyu, what are you doing? Listen carefully in class. If there's anything, we can discuss it after class. Suddenly, a voice sounded behind Shishi and the others. The two little girls shrank their heads. When they looked back, they saw teacher Li Ruolin with a serious face. At this moment, Shishi and Lu Xiaoyu didn't dare to speak. They sat down nervously and listened carefully. After class, Li Ruolin walked up to the two little girls' desks again, and softly asked them why they weren't listening carefully in class, and were whispering to each other. Shishi pouted her small mouth aggrievedly. She pointed at her hair and said, Teacher, it's my fault. My hair. I don't have a hair clip here, so it fell down. I can't listen to class. Yeah, Shishi's hair is a little long. Lu Xiaoyu quickly nodded in agreement. Then I asked Little Fishy if she had a hair clip. Little Fishy helped me find it. Teacher, don't blame her, Shishi said. Lu Xiaoyu scratched her head and added, but I still couldn't find it. Then teacher, you appeared. Shishi lowered her small head and said gloomily. Shishi was even sadder than Lu Xiaoyu when it came to such an incident. This was because the teacher said that Lu Xiaoyu was fine, but she was going to lose a day of, I'm a good student. Moreover, if her father knew that she was being scolded by the teacher when he wasn't at home, how disappointed would he be? Li Ruolin, who understood what had happened, was stunned. She couldn't help but laugh and say, So that's how it is. It's okay. If you have any problems, you can raise your hand and ask the teacher for help. Li Ruolin took off her hair clip and affectionately put it on Shishi's hair. She smiled softly and said, Okay, now you look beautiful again. You have to listen carefully in class in the future. Wow. Lu Xiaoyu cried out enviously. She also wanted the teacher's hair clip. Cici was hugged by her teacher like this, and even put on her hair very gently. Her feelings of grievance instantly disappeared, and only endless gratitude was left. Thank you, teacher. The little girl touched the hair clip on her head, and touched her hair that was finally under control. She looked at the teacher shyly and smiled happily. However, Shishi noticed a problem and asked curiously, But teacher, what about your hair? Li Ruolin gave the hair clip to Shishi, so her bangs naturally fell down. She lifted it up and clipped it to her ear. She smiled and said, It's okay. I don't need the hair clip. Was this the end of the matter? Of course not. With Shishi's clever little brain, there was more to this matter. Chapter 1231. Shishi put on the hair clip given by the teacher. Although it wasn't a special style, it still made many girls envious. After the teacher left, Shishi's desk was immediately surrounded by people. It's really Teacher Li's. Teacher Li is so nice. Liao Qianqian said enviously. I also want Teacher Li's hair clip, but my hair is too short. I don't need to wear a hair clip. Lu Xiaoyu echoed. Who said that? When my hair was as short as yours, I also had to wear a hair clip. Chao Ruolin also came over enviously and said, Cici, why don't I switch places with you, okay? I'll give you my hair clip, and you can lend me teacher's hair clip to play with. No. What if you break teacher's hair clip? Shishi quickly shook her head and said very loyally, I have to protect teacher's hair clip because it wasn't easy for teacher to give it to me. The logic of the last sentence was a little wrong, but after all, she was a child, so there was no need to pursue it. However, Shishi's words still made Chao Ruolin pout, and she was very unhappy. You can also not wear the hair clip. That way, teacher will lend you the hair clip. Lan Xian giggled and came up with a bad idea. However, at this time, whether it was Chao Ruolin or Shishi, the two girls disagreed and shouted, How can this be? This is a lie, you can't lie. Shishi and Chao Ruolin shouted almost at the same time. Lan Xian scratched her head innocently. At this time, a boy with short hair suddenly poked his head out of the circle of girls. Chen Yuxuan looked curiously at Shishi's hair and asked in a rough voice, Young Shi, if the teacher gave you the hair clip, what will the teacher use? That's right. What about the teacher? Shishi was also worried. After the second class, Li Ruolin was chatting and laughing with the other teachers in the office. Suddenly, Lu Xianxian slammed the table and stood up. She said angrily, These little brats. I just finished teaching them a lesson, and now they're acting like there are no tigers in the mountains. I could hear them arguing in the corridor from afar. They're just playing around during class. It doesn't matter. Li Ruolin smiled and tugged at her sleeve, trying to persuade her. It's not just playing around. In the entire building, Class 2's corridor is the loudest. I can even hear the shouts from here. No, I have to go and take a look. If I cause too much trouble, the class leader will deduct my points. I don't know where to put my old face. Lu Xianxian rushed out in a hurry. When she went out, Lu Xianxian was surprised to see Shishi poking her head out of the door of the teacher's office. Although Lu Xianxian was the form teacher of Class 2, she was also Shishi's math teacher. She also liked Shishi very much. She had a strong family background and excellent grades. Therefore, when she saw Shishi, Lu Xuanxuan's serious face immediately softened. She asked with a smile, Young Shi, who are you looking for? Are you looking for your form teacher? Shishi quickly nodded. Go, she's sitting there. Lu Xianxian smiled and brought Shishi in. Although Shishi had been to the teacher's office several times, Lu Xianxian still enthusiastically brought Shishi to Li Ruolin before leaving to deal with her Class 2 mantis shrimp. Shishi saw teacher Li Ruolin and scratched her head in embarrassment. She smiled at Li Ruolin, and then took off the hair clip on her head. She held it in her two small hands and said obediently, Teacher, I'll return this hair clip to you. Li Ruolin saw her hair clip and habitually brushed her bangs. She asked in surprise, Young Shi, don't you need it? How are you going to class without a hair clip? Shishi placed the hair clip on the teacher's desk and smiled proudly. Hee teacher, I have one too. Look. The little girl carefully took out a pen cap from her trouser pocket, as if she had taken out a treasure. Then she happily showed it to the teacher. This was all Shishi's plan. She wanted to leave some suspense and surprise for the teacher, so she specially wore the teacher's hair clip. Of course, she also received the teacher's surprise as she wished. She said that she had a hair clip, but she took out a pen cap? Who wouldn't be surprised? Li Ruolin asked with her mouth agape. This is your hair clip? Yes. Teacher, look. Shishi couldn't wait to demonstrate to Li Ruolin. The little girl gently pried open the buckle of the pen cap a little, then picked up her bangs and fastened them on her hair that had been tied up with a hair tie. A miracle appeared. The pen cap was firmly fastened on Shishi's hair and fixed on Shishi's naughty bangs. Of course, it was a little strange to use a pen cap as a hair clip, but Shishi's pen cap was originally a cartoon with pink and white patterns, so it looked special. You thought of this? Li Ruolin looked at her and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Yes, Shishi happily said to the teacher. Teacher, let me tell you, I was thinking about what you would do without a hair clip. Then I saw my pen cap. I asked Little Fishy, and I said, Little Fishy, do you think I can use the pen cap as a hair clip? Little Fishy said, I don't know, but you can try and see if it works. Then we tried it. The more Shishi spoke, the happier she became. She couldn't wait to tell how she and Lu Xiaoyu experimented, and how they changed the way they tied up her hair, so that the pen cap could clip her bangs. Then I asked little fishy no Xionaire also helped to tie up my hair again so that I could use the pen cap. She said. The little girl finally finished her story, and the class was about to end. The preparation bell outside was ringing, but she was immersed in her happy conversation with Teacher Li and didn't notice. Lu Xianxian just came back and asked with a smile. Yangshi, you're here? I'm going to be in your class next. In order to take care of Xishi's feelings, Li Ruolin deliberately didn't interrupt. After hearing the complete story, Li Ruolin shook her head gently and smiled bitterly at Lu Xianxian. She patted Xishi's shoulder and said softly, Okay, Yangshi, I think you're really smart to be able to come up with such an idea. Okay, then use the pen cap as a hair clip and see if your creativity is good. Now hurry back to class and don't be late. If you can't use the pen cap, then come to the office to find me. It doesn't matter if I have this hair clip or not. Yes. Thank you, teacher. Xishi nodded obediently to the teacher, then ran out happily with a string of bell-like laughter. The little girl's ponytail swayed gently on her back, and the pen cap on her forehead was a little unstable, but under Shishi's brisk and steady steps, it still remained on the little girl's hair. The cartoon picture, looking at it, also showed a unique kind of cuteness on the little girl. Chapter 1232. Murphy's new album was almost ready. However, because of this winter vacation, Yang Yi and Murphy promised Shishi that they would take her to Sweden for a trip to find Lu Weisha to ski and see the aurora. Therefore, in order not to let the promotional and chart itinerary affect the family's trip, Murphy postponed the release of the album to after the Spring Festival. After this news came out, many fans who thought that Murphy would still release a new album at the end of the year were greatly disappointed. However, fortunately, Phoebe Studio also passed on some small benefits to the fans through official micro-broadcasting, which also calmed their turbulent emotions. First of all, in mid-December, the last stop of Murphy's national concert tour this year, which was the Jiangqing leg of her return to Jiangqing, Murphy would meet the fans with 2 new songs. This was also the song that Yang Yi wrote for Murphy, so they had the confidence to disclose the songs of their new album in advance. Of course, this was also the consistent style of Murphy and Yang Yi over the years. Secondly, at the beginning of November, Murphy's new album next year began to be pre-sold in the Sahara Online Mall. Fans who had bought in full would get a Sahara Double 11 Shopping Festival voucher for half of the album price. Although these vouchers were not free, the Sahara Double 11 Shopping Festival had now become a national shopping carnival. Everyone would rush to buy some discounted goods during this festival. Therefore, it seemed that Murphy's new album was also equivalent to a 50% discount. Under such a discount, Murphy's album had not yet been released, but the pre-sale sales had reached an amazing level. Of course, this sales volume could not be counted in Murphy's album sales. Moreover, this hidden discount model had actually broken the traditional business rules of the record industry. After being reported by the media, this matter caused an uproar in the music industry and caused great controversy. After all, Murphy's pre-sale sales alone had already crushed the current records on sale. Although fans believed in the quality of the records that Yang Yi personally made for Murphy, it had to be said that this voucher model for buying records still prompted some people to buy Murphy's records. To a certain extent, it was indeed unfair to other singers. Major record companies in the music industry, and even many stars, jumped out to denounce Murphy's approach. In fact, the scapegoat should be Mo Xiaowan. She was the one who came up with this idea. Finally, the Copyright Organization and the Recording Industry Association couldn't sit still. They began to intervene in the investigation and prepared to hold a hearing to discuss the possibility of discounting the pre-sale data into the total before Murphy's new album was officially released. In this regard, Phoebe Studio, which stood at the cusp of the storm, was still very calm. Yang Yi and Murphy actually didn't care much about the record sales data. After all, for them, the money earned was just a drop in the ocean. Therefore, Yang Yi and Murphy expressed their attitude to the public through the studio's official micro-broadcasting. They supported the decision of the Copyright Organization and the Recording Industry Association. This made the fans, who were originally a little restless and wanted to defend Yang Yi and Mo Fei, quiet down. We are probably the most peaceful group of fans among all the stars. Under the official Weibo announcement, fans joked with each other. Yes, Boss Yang and Goddess Mo are very calm. Why are we in a hurry? But the problem is, even if they discount it by half, it seems that we still have the most sales. 23-33-inch, I've decided to buy another album. Anyway, there are still rebates and it's not expensive. It's just enough to make up a round number for Murphy's sales. Hehe, the suggestion above is good. The hustle and bustle of the entertainment industry did not affect the Sahara's Double 11 shopping festival, which was once again hyped up this year. Although some online shopping platforms also chose to play the edge ball and take advantage of Sahara's popularity to sell at a discount, they still couldn't compare with Sahara's discount and product coverage. It was worth mentioning that on this year's Double 11, Sahara launched a two-pronged attack. Sahara Online Mall and Sahara Taobao Mall launched a shopping festival together. The quality of the goods in Sahara Online Mall was guaranteed, and many of them were direct sales by manufacturers, so the discounts were very high. On the other hand, Sahara Taobao Mall had a wide range of products. Here, people could choose a variety of special products, coupled with a variety of vouchers, red packet deduction coupons, and so on. The purchase discounts were also very good. Therefore, before the arrival of Double 11, many people crazily swiped the Sahara app, looking for the products they liked to add to the shopping cart, waiting for the day of Double 11 to place an order. As mentioned above, the red packet deduction coupon was a kind of deduction coupon jointly provided by Yang Yi's Backwave Technology Company and Sahara. In order to support Sahara's Double 11, and also to take advantage of the popularity to promote microbroadcasting and WeChat, Yang Yi also asked Backwave Technology Company to launch their developed red packet in advance. This red packet function was not as simple as sending and receiving red packets between friends. Now it could also be used for some businesses' official microbroadcasting and public accounts to distribute red packet deduction coupons. In addition, it also had the function of snatching red packet deduction coupons at all times. There were all kinds of benefits. It was a joint effort between Yang Yi's company and Sahara, but this really did bring benefits to many customers. It could be said that throughout November, the Sahara Double 11 shopping festival had created a great momentum, but many media outlets still brought Yang Yi along when they reported on Sahara. After all, the rise of Sahara's Taobao Mall also meant that the overall market value of the Sahara Group would soar. As a significant shareholder of Sahara, although Yang Yi did not admit it, this was already a fact that everyone knew. Plus the strong performance of Backwave Technology Company, Yang Yi's value had obviously reached a terrifying level. The media did a math problem in their analysis. They did not include Yang Yi's income in the entertainment industry. They only analyzed Yang Yi's Backwave Technology Company and some of his shares in Sahara. The shares of Backwave Technology Company are almost in the hands of Yang Yi alone, and it is said that Yang Yi's shares in Sahara are not low. If these two companies go public in 5 years, Yang Yi will become one of the youngest 100 billion billionaires in China. Why one of them? After all, there were still rich second generations in this world, especially in this world's China. Without some historical twists and turns, many people had completed the accumulation of wealth decades ago, and there were many billionaires. Naturally, their children, who were born with a silver spoon in their mouths, became billionaires early. It was not strange that their children, who were born with a silver spoon, became billionaires early. Of course, Yang Yi knew his own situation. Although he earned more in other aspects, the amusement park built for Shishi was a bottomless pit. Yang Yi had been throwing money into it over the years, including the early land investment. The first phase had already invested billions. Moreover, although the first phase had been built, there were still several phases behind it. They were like birds waiting to be fed, waiting for Yang Yi and Lans Haokai to raise funds to invest in the construction. In addition, there was also the plan to transform the training island. Currently, Lans Haokai was negotiating with the Jinling city government. They were prepared to persuade the city government to provide a certain amount of policy and financial support. This way, they would invest a portion of the money to build a bridge across the river. This way, Tourists could drive directly to the training island to play, instead of having to take a boat or cable car to cross the river. Of course, the investment for this bridge, even with the government's financial support, was still a terrifying figure for Yang Yi and company. Although Yang Yi's net worth was repeatedly mentioned by the media, due to some interests, Yang Yi could not avoid being schemed against by others. In the second half of the year, Beijing television station's second season of China's The Voice once again took the top spot in the variety show ratings. As for Xiangnan television station and Xingyao television station's travel challenge, although they had carefully revised it, they still could not achieve their ambition of making a comeback. Finally, someone could no longer sit still. Some cameramen and stage managers who had previously jumped ship from Zhongxing's The Limit Challenge were called over. Someone had a paid secret conversation with them. However, let's not talk about this big news that was still brewing. First, there was a special situation with Xi. Chapter 1233. In the middle of November, Jiangqing already had the bleakness of the end of autumn. In the campus of Huijia Primary School, the lush trees in summer were becoming sparser day by day, just like Nan Zhaoyu's father's hair. After an autumn rain, the next day, withered yellow leaves covered the entire campus. Looking from afar, it was as if there was a desolate feeling of dusk in the skyscraper, the leaves of the parasol tree rustling. Of course, in the eyes of the children, the end of autumn had its own fun. Stepping on the fallen leaves would make a crunching sound, and lifting one's leg to sweep away an army would give one the demeanor of a contemporary hero. Even the ancient game of pulling out the old roots, pull out the veins of the leaves, choose the thickest and toughest ones, and pull them out in a cross with others to see who could last until the end, after being brought up by a student, quickly became popular throughout the school. After class, the square with the most fallen leaves on the campus that hadn't been completely swept would be filled with boys who were close to mom. They lowered their heads and carefully searched for their 1,000-year-old roots. No matter how childish these games were, as long as they had fun, every day was a spring. This morning, Xi accompanied Lu Xiaoyu to move the homework they collected today to the teacher's office. It was worth mentioning that Lu Xiaoyu had been appointed by Li Ruolin as the language representative for this semester, because of her great improvement in her grades last semester. However, Xi didn't dare to go to the teacher's office before, except for when she couldn't find Ms. Li to be a good student. She rarely went to the teacher's office. But after Li Ruolin lent her the hairpin, Xi finally really liked Ms. Li Ruolin, and was willing to help Lu Xiaoyu move the homework to the office. But this time, when they just walked into the office, the two girls paused for a moment. They saw Ms. Li Ruolin talking to Jiang Chen. Jiang Chen got into trouble again? Xi looked at Lu Xiaoyu in confusion, and communicated with her eyes. Lu Xiaoyu also shook her head in confusion, indicating that she didn't know. But in the past half-month, Jiang Chen seemed to be a lot more well-behaved. He didn't make a fuss in the classroom either. He usually went to school alone and sat in his seat in a daze in the classroom. He didn't have any sense of presence at all. Cici almost forgot about his existence. At this time, Jiang Chen threw himself into Ms. Li Ruolin's arms, and began to cry in a muffled voice. This sad look made Xi and Lu Xiaoyu unable to believe their eyes. Was this still the little overlord Jiang Chen who was not afraid of anything? He must have switched souls with Nan Zhaoyu. At this time, a male teacher sitting behind Li Ruolin was holding a thermos flask, and he staggered to the front to get some water. He was stopped by a female teacher, and the two began to gossip. Cici and Lu Xiaoyu were standing close to each other, so they overheard their conversation. The female teacher asked, "What happened? Why is the child crying so sadly?" The male teacher said, "Something happened in the boy's family. He came to Ms. Li to talk, and then he began to cry." The female teacher said unhappily, "What's the matter? Why did you only say half a sentence?" Male teacher, "Sai, it's not good to spread this, but I'm telling you, don't tell anyone." The boy's father and mother argued for a few months, and they officially divorced yesterday. Divorce? Xi blinked and didn't understand the meaning of this word. Of course, the female teacher then excitedly gossiped, and gave Xi a more detailed explanation. Divorce? What's the reason? What other reason could there be? The man cheated. I heard before that he always said he was on a business trip, but in fact he kept a female university student and fell in love with her. After a few months, he still didn't change his mind, so his mother had to divorce him. Shishi's eyes were wide open as she looked at the teachers nervously. What about the child? That man must be irresponsible and ran away with the mistress. The female teacher guessed. That's not it. After all, she gave birth to a boy, and the boy's father still wants a son. The lawsuit took half a month. Fortunately, the child didn't disappoint. Not only did the judge give him to his mother, but he also argued that he wanted to be with his mother. Otherwise, his mother would really be sad. The male teacher sighed. The mistress and that man will die a horrible death. They broke other people's families. The female teacher said indignantly. However, she quickly sighed. But it's also a pity for the child. He can only live with his mother in the future. That man has a mistress and has another one. He probably won't care about the past anymore. Isn't that so? Oh right. How will the family property be divided? I don't know, but since it's all in court, it should be clear. Cece could no longer listen to the gossip that the teachers were gossiping about. The little girl's little face revealed a somewhat confused and fearful expression. She. Lu Xiaoyu's voice brought her back from her daze. She saw that Lu Xiaoyu pointed at Li Rulin's desk and whispered, She, the teacher told us to bring the homework over. It turned out that Li Rulin, who was comforting Jiang Chun, noticed the two girls. She used her hand gestures and eyes to signal the two girls. Finally, she put up a finger and made a shoe expression. Shi and Lu Xiaoyu put the homework on the teacher's desk and left. Along the way, Shi was in a daze and didn't say anything. Lu Xiaoyu and Shi didn't have the habit of talking when they were together, but today Shi didn't say anything either. When they returned to the classroom and sat down, Shi didn't say anything. This made her feel strange and awkward. No one said anything. This doesn't feel right. Lu Xiaoyu had to speak up herself. She leaned over and whispered, Shi, can we not tell others that Jiang Chun cried? Shi turned her head in confusion and responded sluggishly, Huh. That's right. Jiang Chun cried so hard. If we tell others, will he be angry? Lu Xiaoyu had to repeat herself. Let's not tell others. She subconsciously felt that it wasn't a good thing. She pouted and muttered, but we should be able to tell Papa, because Papa knows a lot of things. The girl's words were a bit messy because her mind was in a mess. Especially when she thought of her father, she couldn't help but recall the teacher's words in the office. The boy's father and mother argued for a few months and officially divorced yesterday. He always said he was on a business trip, but in fact he kept a female university student and fell in love with her. Poor child, he can only live with his mother in the future. After all, she gave birth to a boy, and the boy's father still wants a son. His father won't care about him anymore. Sometimes having a good memory wasn't a good thing. After Lu Xiaoyu heard it, she forgot it immediately, but she still remembered it clearly. These voices echoed in her mind, and she thought of her favorite father. Father is so good. He knows everything. He knows everything. And he speaks very gently, treats me very carefully, and is patient. The girl thought of the happy days with her father, and gradually dug out from the depths of her memory the memories before she was 4 years old that had been buried for a long time. What if father doesn't want me? A terrible thought popped up in Shishi's mind, and suddenly, the girl's eyes turned red. Chapter 1234. When Shishi came home in the evening, her father, who had come to pick them up, had already noticed her unusual behavior. Of course, Shishi didn't like to talk, so Yang Yi couldn't hear his daughter's chatter. Naturally, he could sense that something was wrong. Yang Yi first asked Shishi, but the little girl pouted and didn't want to say anything. Then Yang Yi looked at Lan Xian in confusion, and Lan Xian also scratched her head with a puzzled look. Obviously, Shishi didn't tell Lan Xian about her feelings. A little girl at this age would have a little bit of personal emotions. Yang Yi didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he sent the two little girls home. Then he called Cece, who had just returned home, and brought her to the living room. He sat down on the sofa and had a one-on-one talk with her. Murphy also noticed the abnormality. She frowned in confusion and made eye contact with Yang Yi. What's going on? Yang Yi shook his head gently and signaled her with his eyes to take Tong Tong to the side hall, in case she refused to say what was on her mind. Of course, Yang Yi knew that Murphy would definitely run to the stairs to eavesdrop on them. Given her concern for Shishi, the noise from behind also confirmed his guess. What happened at school? Did someone bully you? Yang Yi was actually most worried about this situation. Although Lan Xian said that nothing special had happened, he was still worried. He said half-jokingly, "Did someone say that you can't tell your father, or else I'll beat you? Don't be afraid, Dad will protect you. In this world, who is more powerful than your dad? Am I right? No one can beat your dad." Shishi listened to her father's words and became sadder. He saw that the little girl's tears were starting to fall. Her delicate little face was like a pear blossom in the rain, which made people feel a sense of pity for her. Did someone really bully you? Which little bastard? Or which lord? Yang Yi's heart was instantly filled with anger. Although he still held it in and asked Cece in a gentle voice, so as not to scare the little girl. The veins on his fists that were placed beside his legs were already popping out. No. Shishi hugged her father's hand and shook her head while sobbing. She was so choked up that her voice sounded nasal. No. Yang Yi was confused. He gently patted Shishi's little hand and wiped away Shishi's tears. His heart ached as he coaxed her. Okay, don't cry. Come, let Daddy hug you. If you feel wrong, tell Daddy. I don't know why you're crying like this. Daddy is very worried about you, you know? Shishi threw herself into her father's arms. The sadness that had been brewing all day was suddenly vented. She cried even louder and more heartbroken. Of course, she did need to vent. Shishi had been worried for the whole day. The little girl didn't know how to face the idea in her mind. She was almost suppressed into the old version of Yu Xiaowei. Yang Yi coaxed as if his heart was being cut by a knife. At the same time, he gritted his teeth and even had the urge to kill someone. However, until now he still didn't know who provoked his baby girl. She cried for a while. After she vented the anger in her heart, she felt better and was finally willing to speak. It's Jiang Chen's. The little girl sniffled and stuttered. Jiang Chen? Yang Yi couldn't wait for Shishi to cut out the whole story. When he heard the name, his eyes almost popped out. He repeated the name repeatedly, but in his heart he was about to tear the little boy into pieces. He bullied you? How did he bully you? Yang Yi held back his anger. While he wiped the tears on Shishi's face with a tissue, he asked softly. It must be an unforgivable crime. Yang Yi had never seen Shishi cry so hard. He couldn't wait to drag the boy out of the house and chop him into pieces. However, Shishi shook her head. While rubbing her red eyes and sniffing her red nose, she said with a choked voice, No. Jiang Chen, his daddy is very bad. And then he divorced mom and his mom. Shishi's emotions calmed down a bit. She could finally tell her father the truth. Yang Yi suddenly froze. He had a stomach full of anger, but now he realized that things were not what he thought. Of course, it was actually a good thing that it wasn't what he thought it was. However, Yang Yi didn't dare to be negligent. He carefully asked Cece about the ins and outs of today's matter that made Cece depressed. Little fool. After Yang Yi figured it out, he couldn't help but hold Shishi's little face in his hands, rubbed it intimately, and laughed. What are you thinking? How could Daddy divorce Mommy? Daddy and Mommy are so good, right? Daddy loves you and Mommy the most. How could he bear to leave you? But Daddy also went on a business trip. Daddy didn't go on business trips before. Shishi said with grievance. Because Daddy went on a business trip, I didn't bring my hair clip, and then Daddy picked me up. I'm afraid that Daddy will be like Jiang Chen's daddy. No, Daddy is not such a person. Daddy promises you that in this life, I will only love your Mommy. Yang Yi raised his hand and swore. Of course, Daddy will try not to go on business trips in the future. I will spend more time with you and Mommy so that you won't worry, okay? Shishi was not very satisfied with her father's vow. She pouted and said, No, you don't only love Mom. You also have to love me. And little brother, Daddy, you have to say that you only love me, Mom, and little brother. Yes, yes, yes. Yang Yi was a bit dumbfounded and swore again. With her father's promise, Shishi was obviously relieved, but at this time, the little girl didn't smile happily. Instead, she squeezed more into her father's arms. She took her father's hand and let him hold her tightly. Yang Yi thought that Shishi was particularly insecure today, so he simply stayed with her for a while. Little fool, don't think too much in the future. How can other people's business have anything to do with you? Of course, Jiang Chen is also very pitiful, but our family is still very happy. Daddy and Mommy both love you very much. Yang Yi softly persuaded. What Yang Yi didn't know was that Cece wanted to tell her father what she had been holding back all day. Therefore, after he finished comforting her, Cece snuggled into her father's arms and listened to the heavy voice coming from her father's chest. She also couldn't wait to say, "Papa, Papa, let me tell you. When I thought about you divorcing Mama today, I was scared out of my wits." Before Yang Yi comforted her, the little girl continued, because a teacher said that Jiang Chen's daddy wanted him because Jiang Chen was a boy, but Jiang Chen didn't want to be with his daddy. So Jiang Chen followed his mom. But Jiang Chen wouldn't be able to see his daddy. "I like daddy so much. I don't want to not see daddy. I want daddy to be with daddy forever." As Shishi spoke, she couldn't help but feel a little sad. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry, only her nasal voice became more nasal. Even in such a situation, Yang Yi didn't have a chance to interrupt, because Shishi was still describing the changes in her mind today. "I want to be with daddy, but I'm afraid that Mom will be very sad. I like daddy very much, but I also like Mom. I don't want Mom to be sad, so I'm very sad." Shishi said her dilemma. When Yang Yi heard this, he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief because he knew that Murphy was listening. If Shishi completely sided with him when she was talking, Yang Yi was worried that he wouldn't be able to coax Murphy. But fortunately, Shishi was still very sensible, and she also took care of her mother's feelings. "Don't be sad, because this situation doesn't exist. Daddy and Mommy are fine." Yang Yi smiled easily, touched the little girl's soft long hair, and said with a smile, "Moreover, Daddy and Mommy will always be fine, so you will never have to worry about this problem." Yes, I want Daddy and Mom to be together forever, and me and my brother, our whole family to be together forever." Cece hugged her father's arm and happily rubbed her head against it. Finally, she happily revealed a tear-stained smile. After comforting Shishi, Yang Yi finally breathed a sigh of relief. After all, he also had other worries. Fortunately, the worst possibility didn't appear. And Shishi was just scaring herself, so it was fine as long as she made things clear. Yang Yi took Shishi to wash her face and coaxed the little girl to do her homework. Then he smiled and shook his head, and walked upstairs. Just now he heard that when Shishi wanted to stay in his arms for a while, Murphy took Tong Tong upstairs. "Hey, I thought it was something serious, and I almost went crazy. Fortunately, it was just Shishi who was worried for nothing." Yang Yi pushed open the bedroom door, and said to Murphy with a smile. He wanted to tease Murphy about this matter, but after he came in, Murphy turned around, and Yang Yi was surprised to find that Murphy's eyes were also red, and it looked like she had cried. "What's wrong with you?" Yang Yi was dumbfounded. "I'm sad too." Murphy sniffled and opened her hands sadly. Although Murphy usually had a cold and elegant appearance, in reality, she was also a sentimental person. Especially in the past few years, after Yang Yi melted her iceberg, her soft heart no longer had a protective shell of her own. When she heard Shishi talk about her worries, Murphy couldn't help but let her imagination run wild. Shishi was thinking about her parents' divorce and who she should be with. Murphy, on the other hand, directly went into a dead end. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that her future was bleak. If her husband didn't want her, would Shishi leave her because she liked her father more? If Shishi left her, would Tong Tong abandon her, too, since he liked her sister so much? Ever since Tong Tong insisted on sitting with her sister during the parents' open house, Murphy faintly constructed a possibility in her mind that was definitely meant to scare herself. After all, he was a Scorpio. The more Murphy thought about it, the sadder she felt. Even if she didn't care about these children, Murphy thought about not having Yang Yi by her side. When she returned to the bedroom, She threw herself on the bed and cried bitterly. Tong Tong sat by the side with an innocent look on his face, not knowing what had happened. And so, the scene that happened when Yang Yi came and was born. Yang Yi opened his arms and hugged Murphy. At the same time, he smiled bitterly in his heart. Well, after comforting the little ones, he still had to comfort the elder ones. But after all, they were the people he loved the most. Okay, hubby hug. Don't cry. Yang Yi's heart softened. Chapter 1235. In order to make it up to Shishi, who was worried sick, Yang Yi made time for the weekend to take her to the largest bookstore in Jiangcheng. After all, it had been a long time since Yang Yi had accompanied her to go shopping. Moreover, Shishi had grown up a little, so it was time for her to read some meaningful books. She couldn't always read children's books. She was addicted to stories but lacked the influence of literature. Because the weather in Jiangcheng was very cold, Shishi couldn't go out in a pretty but thin dress like before. But it didn't matter. Even if she wore a sweater and long pants, the little girl's slender and thin body could still hold them up easily. Especially today, when she went to the bookstore with her parents, the little girl was in a good mood. She giggled and skipped in front of them. Her lively figure was so cute that it made people want to pinch her cheeks. Little Momo was infected by his sister's vigor. He struggled out of his mother's embrace, his little butt shaking as he happily ran towards his sister. As the little fellow ran, he anxiously shouted, "Wait for me, sister, wait for me." It wasn't until he stuffed his little hand into his sister's hand that he felt relieved and giggled. "But if I hold your hand, how can I find books to read?" Cece's big eyes curved into crescents as she said to little Momo. Oh, that's right, that's right. Tong Tong was faced with a difficult problem. After thinking for a while, he still couldn't think of an answer. He frowned and pouted, not knowing how to answer. But he didn't want to let go of his sister's hand. Of course, this problem was solved when his parents came up. With his parents by his side, Tong Tong was very safe. When his sister was flipping through some of the children's books on the bookshelf, the little fellow had been curiously looking left and right. There were still many children around, but they were all older than him. Moreover, most of them were big brothers. He didn't even see a girl as beautiful as his sister. Interestingly, those big brothers and sisters were sitting on the ground reading. When he looked over, they looked over cautiously, as if they were afraid that he would scold them. Isn't it dirty? A thought that didn't belong to him sprouted in Tong Tong's mind. Although the other children were older than him, they were still children. When Tong Tong came to the dwarf kingdom, he inexplicably grinned and giggled. However, after seeing all these new things around him, little Momo looked at his sister curiously. With his small stature, he could only press his hands on the bookshelf and tilt his head up to look at his sister from below. This was a new way of playing. Tong Tong found his own happiness. The little boy walked along the bookshelf and squeezed to his sister's side. This way, he could peek at his sister's focused expression through the corners of the books. Hee hee. Tong Tong laughed contentedly, and even used his little but to nudge his sister. However, she only felt that she was nudged. The little girl was immersed in the story and didn't have any reaction. Murphy, on the other hand, was absent-mindedly flipping through the children's books. From time to time, she would glance at Tong Tong to prevent him from running away to play. When she saw this scene, she laughed and rubbed Tong Tong's little head. Yang Yi, who had disappeared for a while, reappeared. He had gone to look for books for Shishi. He always felt that Shishi should read more in-depth books, so he specially went to look around the other areas. Now he came back with a stack of books. Shishi, come and take a look at these books. Do you like them? Yang Yi smiled and said to Shishi as he placed the books he found on the bookshelf. What books? Shishi reluctantly moved her gaze away from the children's books in her hands and curiously looked at the books her father brought over. This is a children's encyclopedia. Yang Yi smiled and picked up a thick tome. He said to Shishi, its content is all-encompassing. Look, it talks about nature, such as how a mother lion moved with her baby. It also talks about art such as the piano, guitar, or violin that we learned, how these instruments were born, and some historical stories. In any case, You can find the answers to many questions that you have thought of before or new things that you have not come into contact with. Wow, really? Shishi's interest was piqued. After she exclaimed in surprise, she put down the children's books in her hands and picked up the new books her father recommended to her. Then the little girl cried out in joy. Wow, they're all colorful. So many beautiful photos. Papa, I saw the lion mom biting the little lion. Yang Yi smiled and nodded at the little girl who raised her head in surprise. He waited until Shishi flipped through a few pages and gradually became fascinated by the books. Then he began to introduce the second book. Shishi, this book is also good. The largest bookstore in Jiangqing was very large, and the atmosphere of reading was very strong. Although Yang Yi only brought Shishi to buy books, in the process of constantly flipping through the books and looking for books, they were influenced by the other children and adults who loved books in the bookstore. Even little Momo ended up flipping through a picture book that her sister had put back with great interest. This children's book was suitable for children above the age of 6 because it had a lot of words. However, even though little Momo couldn't understand it, he still pouted slightly. Like a leader reviewing a document, he hastily reviewed the illustration on the cover. Then he imitated his sister and flipped to the next page to continue reading. In the end, when Yang Yi pushed a pile of books in his trolley to the front desk to buy them, Tong Tong ran over with a children's book in his little hands and handed it to his father. You want to buy books too? Yang Yi asked him, amused. Little rascal nodded solemnly. Of course he wanted to buy books. Otherwise, why would he hand it to his father? Tong Tong, who used to shop with his father and sister, knew that he could not be reserved when he wanted something. If he liked a toy, he must give it to his father to buy it so that he could bring it home. Can you understand it? Murphy could not help but ask with a smile. Yes. Tong Tong did not answer the question, but he felt that his answer was correct. He even nodded his little head vigorously. Since Tong Tong wanted to buy books, Yang Yi did not treat him differently. He put the books in the trolley and paid the bill. However, when they left the bookstore, Shishi unexpectedly found a few claw machines at the exit hall. Shishi had seen these machines in the cinema in the university town before. She knew what they were, but she was in a hurry to watch the movie, so she did not play with them. Papa, let's go take a look. Shishi happily pulled her father's hand. After saying that, the little girl ran over. The little girl, who was wearing winter clothes, ran as light as a deer because of her long legs. Chapter 1236. Claw Machines. Yang Yi remembered that in his previous life, when the sharing economy was just starting to rise, he seemed to have seen someone mention the concept of a shared claw machine in the newspaper, although it seemed to be just to ride on the popularity. Of course, that was built on the background of mobile payment being quite developed. Yang Yi chuckled softly and threw the memory to the back of his mind. He walked behind Shishi and saw that the little girl was curiously looking at a couple who were claw machines. Of course, she was looking at how someone was using a small joystick to move the claw machine. Do you want to play? Yang Yi smiled as he rubbed Shishi's little head and asked. The dolls in the claw machine were not good looking, and the workmanship was not as good as the ones made by Yang Yi's own toy factory. After all, copyright was very strict in this world, and the manufacturers also had to consider the cost. They could only choose dolls with lower copyright fees, which were often not sold well in the market. Naturally, the dolls in the claw machine were very ordinary, and only one or two of them were good-looking. They were used as bait to attract customers. However, the plushies only accounted for less than half of the fun. Wasn't the process of picking the plushies and the sense of accomplishment that came with it the most important part? Shishi was eagerly looking at other people playing. When she heard her father's question, she naturally turned around happily and nodded vigorously at him. Tong Tong was short and did not know what was going on. He stood beside his mother in boredom and let his mother hold his hand. He looked left and right. There were still many new things in this world that he had not seen before. Come, each of you have a basket of coins. You can put them here and have a competition. Let's see if your mother can claw more dolls, or Shishi can claw more dolls. When Tong Tong came back to his senses, his father had already returned with the coins. The little boy was attracted by his father's words. He looked up curiously and saw his mother clapping her hands happily. With a pleasant laughter, he went to the front of a machine. What are my sister and mother playing? Tong Tong did not realize that she had been abandoned by her mother. Fortunately, after her father settled them down, he squatted down to carry Tong Tong and stood beside her sister's machine. She, your little brother is also here to cheer for you. Yang Yi laughed as he shook Tong Tong's little fist. Nonsense, mommy clearly supports mom. Murphy grumbled from the side. Of course, she was focused on figuring out how to use the claw machine. After all, she hadn't played with it in a long time, so she didn't have the time to raise her head. Cece, on the other hand, received her father's guidance. Cece, put this game coin into this hole. Put 3 coins in. Then, when this indicator light turns on, you can use this joystick to control the clamp. In order to play with this claw machine well, she tensed up her little face a little nervously. She listened attentively to her father's words, her big eyes following her father's fingers around. Haha, she, my clamp can move now. Come and see. Murphy suddenly smiled proudly at the side. Although Murphy's words were a little boastful, she still successfully attracted Shishi's attention. The little girl hurriedly went to her father's side and leaned over to her mother's side, watching in amazement. Look, when I move this joystick, the clamp can move. Right, forward, back. With her daughter watching and her son looking back, Murphy became even more enthusiastic as she demonstrated with a smile of exultation. It's true. Shishi was very supportive as she exclaimed in amazement. At this time, Tong Tong's ignorant little face finally changed a little. He looked at the claw machine in amazement. Tong Tong felt that her mother was actually able to control it. It was super awesome. It was just like those amazing robots on TV. Yang Yi held back his laughter as he watched Murphy's performance. Finally, he couldn't help but remind her. Stop fiddling with the claw. Hurry up and aim at the doll. Its time is almost up. Murphy's reaction was a little slow. She only came back to her senses after Yang Yi spoke for a while. Oh no, she screamed as she fiddled with the joystick. However, at this time, the claw stopped by itself. Then it fell. When Murphy forgot to hit the red button, it finally fell between the gaps of several dolls. When it got up, it didn't clamp anything. Aya. Murphy sighed regretfully. Yang Yi took the opportunity to wink at Shishi. See, this is a negative example. When you clamp the doll later, don't forget to look at the time. Yang Laoi, no Yang Lao Tai, you're mocking me again. Murphy pouted and said angrily. Go teach Shishi. Murphy, even if I don't need your help. I must clamp the doll myself, and then defeat Shishi. Perhaps feeling a little embarrassed, Murphy pushed Yang Yi and Shishi back. She decided to work hard behind closed doors and clamp a doll to prove herself. Yang Yi held Tong Tong in one hand and pointed at the ground with the other hand, teaching Shishi how to clamp the doll. Yes, insert the coin. It's starting. Move this joystick and move it to the doll you want to clamp. Aya, it's not right. Yang Yi gently encouraged Shishi because she had made the same mistake. It's okay. Let's keep up the good work. We still have so many game coins. What are you afraid of? Not only that, but Yang Yi also patiently guided Shishi. After Shishi made 3 mistakes in a row, Yang Yi asked, which doll do you want to clamp? Is it this one? The pretty one? In fact, it was easy to guess because Shishi was very focused and persistent. She placed several clamps around the doll. Cece stood on her tiptoes and wanted to use her head to push against her father's hand. She followed the direction of her father's finger and nodded. Her pink little mouth pouted as she said, Yes, this is the most beautiful one among them. It's not easy to clamp this one because it was pressed on one side by the doll you turned over just now. Yang Yi smiled and said, Let's change it to the one inside, okay? They're all the same dolls. The one inside might be easier to clamp. Shishi suddenly understood and nodded gently. She continued to insert the game coins and Shishi carefully moved the joystick. Yang Yi looked down from above and waved his left hand. He instructed. To the right, use more force. It's still far away. Go forward. Don't go forward, push the joystick forward. Oh right. Go left and down, adjust it gently, and it'll be right. It had to be said that Yang Yi had good eyesight. When the clamp fell, Shishi looked at it expectantly. The clamp finally fell on the doll like a big hand. Wow. I clamped it. I clamped it. Shishi was so excited that she took small steps and clapped her hands. Tong Tong had been watching attentively. He was attracted by the moving clamp and had been addicted to it. He only came back to his senses when he heard his sister scream. Not yet, not yet. Yang Yi said quickly. Did you forget your mother's lesson? Hurry up and press this red button. Ouch. Before Yang Yi could finish his sentence, he felt an arrow on his waist. He turned around and saw Murphy, who had come over to watch, pinching his waist. She pouted and stared at him angrily. She only remembered when her father reminded her. She hurriedly clapped her hands. He picked up the soft toy with the clamp and swayed it towards the entrance of the cave. But just as everyone held their breaths and stared at it, it swayed a little and suddenly loosened, causing the soft toy to slide down. Hey! Cece cried out in panic. Soon, she unwillingly twisted her little butt, and her little face revealed a distressed expression. Why is it so difficult? It's okay, continue. Try a few more times, and you might be able to clamp it. Yang Yi ignored the soft hand on his waist, and quickly comforted the disappointed girl. This time it will definitely work. She cheered herself up. Perhaps it was the excitement of clamping the doll that gave her motivation. The little girl hummed energetically and threw in the game coins. At this time, Yang Yi's back was pulled. He took the time to look back and saw Murphy's sad eyes. What's wrong? Yang Yi asked, amused. Murphy pitifully shook the few remaining game coins in her basket. She didn't want her daughter to hear, so she mouthed to Yang Yi, Honey, help me. In order to successfully ask for help, she even looked left and right. When she saw that no one was looking, she secretly used her hand to draw a seductive arc behind her buttocks. Her beautiful eyes charmingly blinked at Yang Yi. Of course, she still felt a little embarrassed and her face flushed red. If she didn't use some unconventional means, she would lose. Chapter 1237. How could he not answer his wife's request? Yang Yi took over Mo Fei's basket and counted the game coins in it. There were only enough coins left for 2 claw games. He was a little surprised and asked, Is that all you have left? How did you finish the game so quickly? Murphy smiled awkwardly. She was too embarrassed to answer. She turned around and looked around. Suddenly her eyes lit up and she said, I'm going to buy some more coins. Can you help me with the claw games? Murphy perfectly avoided Yang Yi's question. She bought another 100 yuan worth of coins. The lady boss stacked the coins neatly into the basket. Murphy happily carried the basket and walked back carefully. When she came back, Mo Fei saw that Yang Yi was sitting in her seat, and Cece was frowning and looking at her machine. What was interesting was that little Momo, who was next to her, got out of his father's arms at some point. He ignored his father and stood next to his sister. His little body leaned against the claw machine, facing his sister, waving his hands and talking excitedly. At this moment, Tong Tong looked like a little strategist who was giving advice to his sister. Mo Fei suddenly felt a little curious. She carefully held the basket and leaned closer to listen. Want to become bigger, wow. No one knew what little Momo had said before, but now he began to make threatening gestures like a little dinosaur. He opened his little hands and mouth, first making a strange cry, then babbling a bunch of words that no one could understand. Finally, he said with a snort, then a lot, and so on. He even stood on his tiptoes and raised his hands to gesture. Murphy was confused. She could not help but ask, Mommy, what are you talking about? At this moment, Tong Tong noticed his mother. He held the claw machine with one hand and jumped up and down happily. He seemed to be having a lot of fun. Cece, on the other hand, kindly explained to her mother, Mama, little brother is telling me a story. He said that this claw will become very big, just like a very, very big bird, and then it will catch us all in the sky. Huh? Murphy was dumbfounded. How could it be explained like that? But the claw can't become bigger. After she finished telling her mother, she frowned and muttered in distress, If it can't become bigger, I won't be able to hold on to my doll. Tong Tong looked at his sister and then at his mother. He opened his small hands and gestured. He said seriously, "It can become bigger, bigger. Then give it to my sister." Murphy did not know whether to laugh or cry as she shook her head. She grabbed a few handfuls of game coins from the basket and stuffed them into Shishi's basket on the claw machine's console. She said, "Then you two can slowly study it and see if you can make the claw bigger." She came to Yang Yi's side and held the basket. She asked curiously, "How was it? Did you catch it?" Yang Yi was sitting on the ground in a daze. When he saw Murphy coming back, he quickly took the game coins from her basket and smiled helplessly. "It's not that easy. I was just trying to see how strong the claw is. Now it's time to show my true strength." Murphy looked at Yang Yi suspiciously. She did not know why, but she felt that Yang Yi was a little guilty. Yang Yi was indeed guilty. He originally wanted to pick up a doll and show it off to Murphy when she came back. However, he did not expect that he was not as good as Shishi. Murphy's joystick was a little problematic. It was not linear, and it was very unstable. When she was manipulating it, there would always be large swings, causing the position to deviate. "It's fine. I've already understood the functions of this machine. Just watch. I'll pick up a doll for you right now." In front of his wife, Yang Yi naturally had to appear a little more confident. He waved his hand and solemnly vowed. Shishi started another round of experiments. Tong Tong did not know how to do it, so he climbed onto his sister's seat and squeezed together with her. He watched with great interest. Yang Yi gently pushed the joystick and moved the clamp to the corresponding position. This time he really had some experience. He did not push it slowly. Instead, he pushed it to the approximate position and then made fine adjustments by swinging it. Almost there. When the countdown was about to end, the clamp gradually stabilized and aimed at the target that he had chosen. Lift. Yang Yi waited for the clamp to wrap around the doll and hit the red button forcefully. "Io, be gentle. If you break it, it won't be fun anymore." Murphy saw that Yang Yi was a little excited and hurriedly persuaded him. However, the scene that happened behind the transparent glass made Yang Yi dumbfounded again. The clamp did not tighten immediately. Instead, it tightened as it was lifted. In the end, it slid across the surface of the Saturn Peach doll that Yang Yi had chosen. "What the hell? There's something wrong with this machine." Yang Yi could not help but complain. He turned his head and saw that Murphy was covering her mouth and laughing secretly. This is an exception. Maybe there really is something wrong with this machine. Yang Yi braced himself and explained. "Let's change to another machine. Who knows, we might be able to clamp it. Let me tell you, when I was a security guard in the past, I was in charge of the claw machine. At that time, I really had seen countless people. I had seen all kinds of claw machine masters. And I even secretly learned a few moves from them." Murphy was amused by him. She knew that Yang Yi was just bragging to cover up his embarrassment. She did not expose him. Instead, she laughed until her body became weak. She hugged Yang Yi's arm and gave him a flirtatious look. Yang Yi and Murphy switched to the left side of Shishi and the rest, which was the claw machine that the couple had played with earlier. However, Yang Yi was not as good as he had been bragging. After the first few rounds, Yang Yi still could not clamp the doll. "This is a new machine. There will always be time to get used to it." Yang Yi braced himself and said. Not to mention Yang Yi, who had been defeated repeatedly, Shishi also could not clamp the doll. The game coins in her basket were constantly being used up. Finally, the little girl's patience was running out. She pouted her lips and wanted to hold the basket to watch her father clamp the doll. But at this time, little Nguyen saw that his sister had stopped playing, so he stretched out his little hand with interest and pulled the joystick. The little guy raised his head and looked up, but the paw did not move. "Brother, do you want to play?" Cece asked when she saw the situation. She stuffed 3 game coins into the machine and gave her seat to Tong Tong, so that he could sit closer to the joystick. Of course, Tong Tong could not see much. She stood beside the machine and imitated her father. She enthusiastically instructed Tong Tong. "Little brother, let me tell you where to sit." "Okay." Tong Tong nodded happily. However, he did not move for a long time. Shishi realized that something was wrong and hurriedly shouted, "Little brother, you have to move that thing. Otherwise, the time is almost up." Tong Tong imitated her and started to move the joystick. When he saw the claw moving as well, he was so happy that his eyes shone brightly. "A little to the left. Little brother, do you want to clamp this thing? Go a little further," Cece instructed with her head lowered. However, she realized very late that little Momo was having a lot of fun playing with its paw. It wasn't listening to what she was saying at all. Its paw was swinging by itself. "Aya. Little brother, you are not trying to clamp the doll." Shishi mumbled helplessly when she saw that the claw was not able to clamp down on the doll. Sister, Jelly. Jelly." Little Momo didn't pay attention to his sister's complaints. When he saw that the claws were no longer moving after returning to their original position, he hurriedly asked his sister for help. The little guy was quite smart. Since he couldn't reach it, he pointed at the coin slot from a distance and happily called out to his sister. "You still want to play?" Shishi asked in surprise. Tong Tong quickly nodded. "Okay." Although Shishi complained about Tong Tong's attitude, she was still very nice to Tong Tong. Although she seemed unwilling, she counted 3 game coins and stuffed them into the slot. "You have to clamp down on the doll." At this time, Yang Yi's cheers suddenly came from the side. "I clamped it." Cece turned her head in surprise. Yang Yi, who had been so nervous that his facial expression had frozen a moment ago, finally raised his hand and laughed out loud. Mo Fei witnessed this historic scene. Yang Yi had experienced several failures. Finally, in his persistent research, he finally figured out the nature of this machine and added the doll in a very ingenious way. Not easy, not easy. Murphy bent down and picked up the doll from the bottom. She held it up happily and smiled at Yang Yi. Yang Yi also felt that it was not easy. He had failed so many times that he felt a little ashamed. He was too embarrassed to face Murphy and Shishi. Fortunately, he finally succeeded once. For this reason, Yang Yi couldn't help but smile proudly to Mo Fei and boasted. "In fact, it's very simple. You just need to grasp the rhythm of its claw movement." When Shishi saw that her mother had obtained the doll, she could not stand still. She quickly carried her basket and walked towards her father. Papa, can you help me?" Behind her, Tong Tong was still playing with the joystick. He looked at the claw that could change shape and was very happy. Chapter 1238. Yang Yi, Murphy, and the children were still secretly photographed by the paparazzi when they were on campus, in the bookstore, or when they were shopping. However, they didn't care. As long as the paparazzi didn't go overboard, Yang Yi and Murphy were now very calm and ignored those cameras. The proper media wasn't very interested in the private lives of celebrities. However, some entertainment tabloids were very keen to report on Yang Yi and Murphy's sweet days. They also knew that it was very boring to just report such news. So, they simply took some news of celebrities having an affair and put it together with Yang Yi's news on the same page, and reported it together. Thus, there was this situation. The first half of the news was XXX Hotel secret meeting Fierce Man, Intimate Actions Intimate, and the second half of the news was Yang Yi and Murphy playing dolls with children, forgetting themselves and ignoring the paparazzi's secret photos. It was a clear stream. Of course, many online media would still repost such news. After all, they could have an unlimited number of sections. Yang Yi and Murphy's fans were very calm. Is this considered news? When did Yang Yi come out to play by himself? That's called news, okay? However, at the beginning of December, when the attention Yang Yi and Murphy received slightly decreased, an old musician and music critic, Lu Shifang, who once had a conflict with Yang Yi and Murphy, began to bombard Yang Yi on micro-broadcasting. Yang Yi is the most shameless and heartless liar I have ever seen. Liar? What did Yang Yi do to make this irrelevant person call him a liar? Moreover, she scolded him so harshly. Looking at the text and pictures below Lu Shifang's long micro-broadcasting post, one would know. It turned out that Lu Shifang had collected a bunch of information from somewhere to expose Yang Yi's true colors. Yang Yi was very stingy, heartless, and never willing to do charity. First, Lu Shifang first posted a screenshot of a web page, pointing out that in the news about Yang Yi's charity or donations over the years, there was no clear amount of donations. Then Lu Shifeng took out a few screenshots of interviews with the former Extreme Challenge crew members, those who had jumped ship to Xingyao. In the video subtitles and Lu Shifeng's description, these witnesses pointed out that at the charity gala held in the last episode of the first season of Extreme Challenge, although Yang Yi donated books, he didn't donate money. Lu Shifeng's words that bombarded Yang Yi showed disdain. He pointed out that although Yang Yi donated a sum of money in the name of Hua Yi brothers money might have been deducted from the reasonable income of their stars. Lu Shifeng believed that Yang Yi was already worth billions at that time, yet he was reluctant to donate this little bit of money. He deliberately used the name of the company to replace himself. Who knew how many tricks he had played in the middle? It was really not right. Of course, it wasn't just this bit of evidence. Lu Shifeng also listed 2 public welfare funds that Yang Yi had personally set up, the Children's Book Author Support Fund and the Sahara Rural Development Public Welfare Foundation. Although these 2 funds are non-profit, their purpose isn't that simple. The authors supported by the Children's Book Author Support Fund have to sign a contract with Yang Yi's own publishing house. The money they earn has to be shared with the publishing house, not to mention the Sahara Rural Development Public Welfare Foundation. Teach others to open a shop on his Taobao Mall. If you want to do public welfare, please set up some charity funds that can really help others and don't ask for anything in return. Don't sell dog meat under false pretenses. It's disgusting. Lu Shifeng bombarded Yang Yi mercilessly. Obviously, with the strength of Lu Shifeng, an old musician and music critic who was paid to do things, there was no way to get so much evidence and write such a voluminous denunciation. When this explosive micro-broadcast was spread, many people with discerning eyes could guess that there was definitely someone behind Lu Shifeng's actions. And from the looks of the few employees who had jumped ship, the instigator should be related to Xingyao Production or Xiangnan TV station. However, the ordinary people were blind. Many netizens who didn't like Yang Yi, or many netizens who hated the rich, after roughly reading this long micro-broadcasting, couldn't help but follow the crusade against Yang Yi. So that's how it is. You can't bear to donate money to the children in the mountains, and you even use the company's name to make it cheap. But you're willing to invest a lot of money in a fund that's beneficial to yourself. You're taking all the fame and benefits. How can there be such a good thing? I thought Yang Yi was a clear stream, but now it seems that he's a businessman through and through. He's only interested in profits. I'm really disgusted. He's so scheming for a public welfare event. I just want to ask if the money donated by the company has been donated? Zhongxing Production is also Yang Yi's. If the people under him do the accounts, maybe the donated money hasn't been touched, right? Speaking of which, Brother Hua Yi's company isn't very clean, right? Yang Huan and Guozi have a good relationship with Yang Yi, and Thousand Miles Chuanshu, who used to be very popular, seems to have disappeared in the past 6 months? Could it be that he angered Yang Yi and was frozen? It seems that this company is just a money-making tool for Yang Yi. What brother? Bah. He's just putting on a show for charity. I wonder if his love with Murphy is also a show. Could it be that the two of them are just pretending to be together? Now that I think about it, the laughter and emotions that the Limit Challenge brought us were fake. It's so disgusting. Let's talk about something that Teacher Lu missed. Yang Yi is reluctant to spend a lot of money on charity, because he spent billions to build a castle-like amusement park in Jinling City. I just want to know if this amusement park is really built for Shishi to play. I'm afraid his motives aren't pure, right? Hearing this, I also remembered the news. How could this amusement park be built just for a child to play? I'm afraid he wants to take money from us parents. When the time comes, the ticket price will be hundreds or thousands. Are you afraid? We will firmly boycott Yang Yi's company, show, and firmly boycott Yang Yi's amusement park. Although there were still many Yang Yi's fans who heard the news and tried their best to explain for Yang Yi, urging everyone to wait for Yang Yi's response and not listen to other people's words. Under Lu Shifeng's micro-broadcasting, many netizens who hated the rich and did not chase after celebrities were still unwilling to let it go. They even insulted Yang Yi's fans, saying that they were trying to clean up for Yang Yi. In less than a day, microbroadcasting was already in an uproar. Although microbroadcasting was Yang Yi's own territory, with a celebrity like Lu Shifeng's direct bombardment, no staff dared to delete the post. They only had a secret channel to inform Mo Xiaowan immediately. Mo Xiaowan hurriedly organized a meeting to discuss public relations. But in less than an hour, all the major web portals on the internet reposted Lu Shifeng's bombardment of Yang Yi's microbroadcasting, and the views increased exponentially. She had to respond as soon as possible. Otherwise, if the public opinion became one-sided and unfavorable to Yang Yi, it would be very troublesome to deal with public relations. But Mo Xiaowan met someone who was a little stubborn on this matter. Why should I announce my charity information? To prove that I'm not the kind of person he said I am. To prove that I'm a great philanthropist who does charity every month and every year? Yang Yi frowned and asked, charity should be something that both parties are willing to do. If I want to do charity, fine, I'll do it. It has nothing to do with Lu Shifeng. What right does she have to question whether I donated money? Donating money is a favor. Even if I don't donate, it's my duty. Yang Yi was very disgusted by news that forced entrepreneurs and celebrities to donate money, although he also felt that it was right to give back to society after earning money. The way these news forced him to do so was unreasonable. So, in the past few years, he had indeed done a lot of charity and donated a lot of money. But Yang Yi really didn't use his own name, because he didn't want to cause an uproar. He also didn't want his own private actions to put pressure on others. Wasn't it enough to do charity as long as he lived up to his own conscience? Did he have to put on a show? Chapter 1239. Brother-in-law, what you said makes sense, but we are different from before. You are a public figure and an idol in many people's hearts. You are not some unknown small fry. Now that you are faced with such serious public opinion, if you don't stand up and respond, what will your fans think? Mo Xiaowan didn't think that Yang Yi would be so stubborn on this matter. She was already a little anxious, but now she was even more annoyed. Mo Xiaowan could only look at Murphy for help. Sis, talk to brother-in-law. However, what Mo Xiaowan didn't know was that her cousin, who used to have a queenly aura and a queenly style of doing things, had already put away her claws and fangs, and was comfortably snuggling up to Yang Yi as the little woman behind him. I will listen to Yang Yi. Also, I think that donations are good for our conscience. We don't need other people's approval. Mo Fei smiled, reached out, and put her slender hand into Yang Yi's big hand, letting him hold her hand. She then looked at Yang Yi and said softly, Brother Yang Yi, I'm sorry. But the logic of solving a problem shouldn't be like this. Now that we are being slandered, are we just going to let it go? Sit back and do nothing? Let others criticize us? Mo Xiaowan scratched her shoulder-length hair and said speechlessly. Yang Yi shook his head and said calmly, Of course we won't let it go. Why did the company hire a group of lawyers? Don't leave a single one of them behind. Sending a lawyer's letter can only scare Lu Shifeng. It can't solve the public opinion problem. Mo Xiaowan said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. After the news of Lu Shifeng bombarding Yang Yi spread, it didn't take half a day for many media outlets to repost it and discuss it. Some extreme media outlets, in order to ride on the hot topic and attract attention, deliberately said things that hadn't been confirmed yet. With Yang Yi's donation fraud as the keynote, they started to discuss the artist's ethics. As for the slightly more neutral media outlets, they first explained that the news hadn't been confirmed yet. But then, they used this as an introduction to discuss the issue of rich people donating money. There were different opinions, but very few media outlets supported Yang Yi and spoke up for Yang Yi. After all, the current trend of public opinion was in the direction of criticizing Yang Yi. If a media outlet defended Yang Yi, it might easily be attacked by some angry onlookers. Are you retarded editors trying to clear Yang Yi's name? Mo Xiaowan couldn't convince Yang Yi and Murphy in such a short time. She could only release a micro-broadcast to the public in the name of her studio. Of course, just a few lines of text was not persuasive at all. But just as Mo Xiaowan was having a headache trying to convince Yang Yi and Murphy on the internet and micro-broadcast, Without informing Yang Yi, there was a group of people who started to argue for Yang Yi. Chun Yijie expressed on his personal micro-broadcast, Yang Yi and Murphy are the most peaceful, low-key, and life-loving celebrities I've ever met. Because of our musical interests, I've become very good friends with the couple. I don't know much about other things, but I know one thing for sure. During the recording of the first season of China's Voice, there was an event in the middle for the promoted contestants to sing for the disaster areas. Although Yang Yi didn't have time to come personally, from what I know, he arranged for people to send a batch of daily necessities worth 2 million. He also sent someone to supervise and ensure that the necessities were distributed to the victims. The media didn't report about this because Yang Yi requested not to publicize it. So if you say that Yang Yi is too selfish and doesn't do charity, I don't believe it. The most loyal person was Zhu Jie. He directly scolded Lu Shifeng on micro-broadcast. Teacher Lu, do you think I don't know what kind of trash you are? In the past, when Tianmei Entertainment didn't give you any red packets, many artists' records were slandered by you. When Sister Murphy signed a management contract with our company, she was also scolded by you. Now you want to slander my brother Yang? Zhu Jie's next micro-broadcast also exposed an important piece of information. I remember very clearly that during the last episode of the first season of the Limit Challenge last year, Brother Yang brought his daughter, Shishi, along. Although it was a family ticket, Brother Yang still brought a batch of books and donated them to the children in the mountainous areas with Shishi. Apart from that, Brother Yang also donated 2 sums of money. One was in the name of his company to help Yang Huan and Guizi, who didn't have much money at that time. The other was in the name of Shishi. Not many people know about this, but if you want to investigate, you can still find out. Those traitorous staff members weren't even considered marginal people at that time. What the hell do they know? In order to support Yang Yi, Zhu Jie even cursed repeatedly. However, his fans were a group of young people with distinctive personalities. Not only did they not feel disgusted, they even yelled and helped Zhu Jie scold Lu Shifeng. Several guests of the Limit Challenge, such as Jie Yuchen, Dan Hongkue, and other big stars, were wise to protect themselves at first and remain silent. However, after Zhu Jie spoke, they could not sit still and reposted Zhu Jie's micro-broadcast. Although they were not as excited as Zhu Jie, and did not even share the description of the repost, this behavior was in itself silently supporting Yang Yi. In addition to the comments of the celebrities, many people also talked about their stories with Yang Yi. For example, the general manager of Sahara Publishing House, Lu Benji, also asked the official micro-broadcast of the publishing house to clarify for Yang Yi. Authors who had changed their lives because of the Children's Book Author Support Fund, such as Yu Ying, could not help but speak up on the micro-broadcast to defend Yang Yi. However, after all, their influence was relatively low, and not many people saw the micro-broadcast they sent out. However, because of some clever media interviews, that night, an article titled, Yang Yi's Sahara Rural Development Public Welfare Fund is only for personal gain? Farmer. I'd rather have a few more of such public welfare funds. Once again strongly refuted Lu Shifeng's point of view. There was no doubt about the authority of this report because it came from the official micro-broadcast of Yangqing Evening News, a media with an official background. In the report, the reporter interviewed several farmers who had been helped by the Sahara Rural Development Public Welfare Fund, and learned that this summer, the technical guidance provided by the volunteers in the countryside had been of great help to them. Many farmers had obtained a new sales channel for their agricultural products. And just now, under the reminder of some volunteers, the farmers had prepared in advance and provided more distinctive agricultural products. They had actively stocked up and made a lot of money. The farmers do not know Yang Yi, and they do not know who these great benefactors are who have helped them. However, they recognize the Sahara Rural Development Public Welfare Fund, and know that these so-called selfish people have brought them the hope of making a fortune. Bai Guohua of Haidong Village said, I'd rather have a few more of such public welfare funds if they can let me earn more money in half a year. The next day, although Yang Yi still did not give a positive response, the direction of public opinion gradually changed. Thanks to the support of many people, some positive news reports appeared. The onlookers realized that Yang Yi, who seemed to have become a black-hearted big boss, did not seem to be as bad as they had imagined at the beginning. Things seemed to be turning around. Yang Yi, who was involved, had obviously fallen into a misunderstanding. In the end, Mo Xiaowan had to ask Lance Haokai for help. Among these people, Lance Haokai seemed to be a person with great wisdom. Moreover, Lance Haokai and Yang Yi worked closely together. Mo Xiaowan felt that perhaps Lance Haokai's words would be effective. Lance Haokai waited for Yang Yi to come back from sending the children to school before calling him to his villa for tea. "Brother, your way of thinking is wrong." Lan Zhoukai chuckled and said, "Now your identity is different. You know that, right? You also need to think from a broader perspective." As Lance Haokai spoke, he made a gesture with his hand to separate them. Lance Haokai poured tea for Yang Yi, who was drinking tea silently, and said slowly, "You have to know that you are not only representing yourself now. You are also representing your family, your company, and some of the people who need your salary and are related to you. Let me tell you a story. 7 years ago, before my company built our villa area, my Lan family had an uncle who was still a leader in Jiangnan. He said that there was an activity to select some provincial outstanding youth. I would submit your name and do some work to bring back the honor." Lance Haokai said with a smile. "I say, what outstanding youth? I am already 30 years old, and you still call me a youth?" At first, I was unwilling. Later, my uncle scolded me, saying that I was stupid. With such an honor, it would be convenient for me to do anything in the future. Later, I thought that there was nothing wrong with it, so I went to receive it. In the end, I found out that among the outstanding youth who received the award, I was the youngest one. Lance Haokai laughed and went a little off topic. Back to business. After receiving this honor, the people who sold the houses mentioned my name. Many people knew. "Oh, Lance Haokai, I know that outstanding youth in the province. Your boss is very capable." The business started to get better. Then, in the second year, I took the land of our villa from the city. This honor was more or less useful. The leaders in the city felt that I had the qualifications, so they revealed some information to me. Lance Haokai purposely lowered his voice and said to Yang Yi, "I feel that my good luck has a lot to do with this outstanding youth." Of course, Lance Haokai also said that on purpose. When he inherited his family business, his net worth was already more than 1 billion. After that, he relied on his own hard work to increase his net worth several times in more than 10 years. How could an honor change that? Actually, I want to tell you that you should not underestimate your personal influence. Even a traditional person like me knows how to hire people to protect me and the public image of my company. You are the same. When others slander you, you can't just sit back and do nothing just because you don't want to make your principles public. If you are called a liar by others, then your company, our company, and the people related to us will also be called liars, right? Will your daughter, Cece, also leave the impression that she's a swindler's daughter in other people's minds? Lance Haokai's words finally struck a chord with Yang Yi. Yang Yi, who had been drinking his tea quietly all this time, was finally moved. He frowned and began to think carefully. "And Shishi?" Yang Yi sighed helplessly. "Big brother Lan, I understand." On the third day of Lu Shifeng's bombardment of Yang Yi finally responded on his own micro-broadcasting. Other than the photos of the donation receipts that Lu Shifeng had questioned, Yang Yi did not provide any additional evidence. He very succinctly responded on his own micro-broadcasting. "To the fans and other friends who care about us, charity has always been done. Whether it is under one's own name or, as Zhu Jie said, under one's child's name, the donation receipts have always been kept, so there is no need to be afraid of suspicion or slander. But charitable donations should be a conscious and voluntary act from the start. It should not be influenced by the outside world, and it should not be subject to public scrutiny and moral blackmail. This is also the reason why I have never announced my donations to the outside world. Now, in order to not let the fans who care about us worry and be sad, I have taken out a portion of the evidence. The rest will be left to the legal team and Teacher Lu in court. But no matter what, I ask everyone to remain calm and not be morally blackmailed." During the Three Kingdoms period, when Liu Bei entrusted his children to him, He exhorted his descendants like this: "Do not do evil because it is small, and do not do good because it is small." At the same time, I sincerely hope that everyone will not praise and flatter others for donating so much, and also not criticize and abuse others for donating so little. Donating is a gesture of goodwill and a very personal act. As long as you are worthy of your own heart, that is enough. Yang Yi. It had to be said that Yang Yi's direct response still had a very good effect. If others supported him, it would be very difficult to convince the public. On the contrary, Yang Yi's response had reversed the direction of public opinion. More and more media outlets began to switch sides with Yang Yi. They were just like how they had never doubted Yang Yi before. They all commented on Yang Yi's evidence and supported Yang Yi's point of view. The happiest were Yang Yi's and Murphy's fans. They had been worried and scared for a few days, and today they could finally breathe a sigh of relief. They tried their best to defend Yang Yi, but Lu Shifeng was still stubborn. He continued to bombard Yang Yi with the evidence that was not complete and convincing, and that it could have been fabricated in the past few days. What kind of fake evidence can't be fabricated in 3 days? If Yang Yi did not have a guilty conscience, would he need to spend 3 days to respond? Even if it is true, this donation is just a drop in the ocean compared to his family's assets. Compared to XXX, other people have more than $1 billion in assets, but only donated 100 million. It is clear who is the heartless one. Lu Shifeng's micro-broadcasting was still very good. Although he did not provide any more evidence, after his micro-broadcasting was sent out, some of the fence-sitters started to waver again. They felt that Yang Yi had donated too little, but Yang Yi did not reply again. Instead, a lawyer's letter was handed to Lu Shifeng's desk. More than 10 lawyers were rubbing their fists, ready to sue the old man until he went bankrupt. Just as the storm was about to calm down, a press conference was held. It was like a deep-water bomb, blowing up the audience who had gradually quieted down. But this time, they were convinced by Yang Yi. The scale of the press conference was not big. It was just a hastily arranged hotel conference hall. Even the banner was not ready to be hung. This was because Zhu Luyan had returned to Beijing to visit his family. When he found out that Yang Yi had encountered such a big trouble, he hurriedly held the press conference in Beijing. But with Zhu Luyan's background, he invited many influential traditional media reporters. There were even reporters from Beijing television station who brought along their cameramen. This article is about Mr. Yang Yi, saying that he is a hypocrite and a hypocrite who is unwilling to do charity even though he has earned so much money. I believe many of our friends in the media have heard about it. Zhu Luyan held up a newspaper and said seriously, "Here I hope to clarify on behalf of Mr. Yang Yi." Many of the media present looked at him blankly. The surprise and confusion in their eyes were undisguised. Zhu Luyan was related to Yang Yi. One was one of the top 10 young men in the country, who won the Touching China Group Award last year, and was the initiator of Hope Primary School's public welfare project. The other was a singer and businessman. Moreover, the two of them were not in the same place. How could they be related? But Zhu Luyan quickly used pictures, videos, and a detailed donation form to tell them about Yang Yi and himself. Or rather, the relationship between him and Hope Primary School's public welfare project. Mr. Yang Yi's donation to Hope Primary School's public welfare project is indeed not much. Since the first 2 million 3 years ago, he has only donated 2 million every month. If we include the additional donations he made several times because Hope Primary School had large-scale public welfare projects, Mr. Yang Yi has only donated a total of 114 million to Hope Primary School in 3 years. Zhu Luyan chuckled and could not help but say sarcastically, "Although there are not many Hope Primary Schools built, only 5 other than that, he has also given salary subsidies to the village teachers of 11 Hope Primary Schools." But which celebrity can insist on donating 2 million every month regardless of rain or shine? Does Lu Shifeng have it? Zhu Luyan asked the reporters. The reporters could not answer. They looked at each other. Of course, their eyes were shining with excitement. If what Zhu Luyan said was true, and there was solid evidence like what he had broadcasted on the multimedia system, then this would definitely be big news. Over the years, many people have donated to Hope Primary School, But why do I have the deepest impression of Mr. Yang Yi? Zhu Luyan revealed another big piece of news. That's because when I was working on the Hope Primary School project, I met Mr. Yang Yi, who donated the first 2 million to us. It was his guidance that helped us perfect the association's rules and regulations, and the association's goals. From building schools and houses in the past, we changed it to building schools based on the specific needs of poor mountainous areas. Most of the funds were given under the premise of openness, fairness, and impartiality to provide better treatment for these village teachers, so that the students can retain their teachers and the hope of studying. The reporters wrote furiously and even picked up their phones to take pictures. They were very shocked. They did not know that Yang Yi had done so many good deeds. If that was really the case, then this news would be explosive. No wonder Yang Yi said not to praise others because of their large donations, and not to criticize others because of their small donations. It turned out that the last sentence was not the main point, but the first sentence. He did not come up with this sentence for the sake of tidying it up. He really did donate a lot of money. Then they thought about how Yang Yi usually kept a low profile, and the positive energy conveyed to the outside world by the warm life of Murphy and the children. How could such a good person be slandered? There was no justice in this world. Do you know? The name of Hope Primary School was proposed by Mr. Yang Yi. We thought it was good, so we changed it to this name. However, Mr. Yang Yi did not want to be publicized, so this history is not known to anyone. When I mentioned to thank a mysterious person for his help at last year's Touch China Awards ceremony, I was thanking Mr. Yang Yi. Zhu Luyan said with some excitement. So, I'm really sorry. Just now, because of this report that slandered Mr. Yang Yi and said that he was a hypocrite, I couldn't help but get angry. The name of Hope Primary School was proposed by Yang Yi. The reporters present were so excited that they almost fainted. There were too many revelations today. Mr. Yang Yi did not publicize his good deed, but he was misunderstood because of it. As someone who received help from Mr. Yang Yi and the person in charge of the public welfare project, I must stand up and clear Mr. Yang Yi's name. Zhu Luyan clasped her hands and said sincerely, I hope that I can get everyone's help in this matter. Everyone, please rest assured that everything I said is true and verifiable. The reporters all laughed and agreed one after another. Even if it was not Yang Yi's big revelation, they would have worked hard to report it because of his identity as young Master Zhu. Now they did not need any other motivation. They would not give up on this big news. They had already thought of the headline of the news. It had to be ambiguous and attractive enough. It would be called an unknown Yang Yi. Chapter 1240. Perhaps it was because Yang Yi had left a good impression on the other parents, but when the internet was filled with criticism of him, Shishi wasn't affected much at school. However, when the public opinion changed, Shishi felt a little different at school. It wasn't that the parents hadn't seen the news criticizing Yang Yi, but they had been skeptical when they first saw the articles on the news software. However, with the human instinct for gossip, they couldn't help but discuss the matter with their colleagues at work and in the company. Perhaps they had even celebrated Su Kei's misfortune. However, they didn't express it at home in front of their children, as they were worried that their children would talk about it at school. If they met Yang Yi and his wife in the future, it would be awkward. However, most of the parents still felt that Yang Yi wasn't as bad as the news made him out to be. When they discussed it with their friends and colleagues, they more or less defended Yang Yi. Fortunately, Yang Yi didn't disappoint them, especially when Zhu Luyan announced to the media the amount of Yang Yi's donation for the Hope Primary School project. This amount was verified by many media outlets, and all the major media outlets were in the camp of praising Yang Yi for his low-key charity work. The parents who were glad that they hadn't stirred up trouble finally heaved a sigh of relief. Without any worries, they would naturally talk about it at home, in front of their children when they were eating at night, watching TV, and chatting. Thus, the following scene took place. Shishi, I heard from my dad that your dad is a great philanthropist. During the break, Chen Yuxuan came over with great interest and placed both his hands on Shishi's desk as he spoke loudly. Great philanthropist? What's a great philanthropist? Shishi blinked her big eyes and asked curiously. Great philanthropist. It's. Chen Yuxuan probably didn't know how to explain this concept, so he responded casually. However, it was as if his voice was stuck, and he couldn't finish his sentence. He scratched his head awkwardly. Lu Xiaoyu's eyes lit up and she said loudly, "Businessman? I know. Those who do business are called businessmen. I've heard of them too." Merchant? Shishi tilted her head, pouted, and said to Lu Xiaoyu, "Little fishy, that's not true. My papa isn't doing business. He's just singing with my mom. I'm not a businessman. I'm not doing business." Chen Yuxuan scratched his ears and cheeks for a while. Finally, he managed to squeeze out some words and explained excitedly, "I remember now. My dad said that your dad is a good person, a super good person, so he's called a great philanthropist." Really? When Shishi heard someone praise her father, she smiled happily and asked a little embarrassedly. The little girl's smile was a joy that came from the bottom of her heart. Her eyebrows were relaxed and her eyes were sparkling. Her cute little mouth even drew a relaxed arc. It was very comfortable to look at, and it was easy to be infected by her happy mood. A little boy sitting in the front row couldn't help but look back. He racked his brain to try to insert himself into the conversation between Shishi and Jiangchen. He stuttered. That I remember. There's a person on TV, who's also called a great philanthropist, the great philanthropist of the 9th generation. I've also seen this TV show before. During the summer vacation, I watched it with my mom. Jiangchen passed by and his ears perked up. He suddenly turned back and said excitedly, "That great philanthropist of the 9th generation, is he a turtle? I forgot about that." "I think so." The little boy in the front row scratched his head in embarrassment. Shishi listened to their conversation and was a little unhappy. She yelled at Jiangchen, "No, he's not a turtle. Your papa is a turtle." Although the little turtle is quite cute, my papa is not. My papa is my papa." Jiangchen looked at Shishi, dumbfounded, and said innocently, "I'm talking about TV." Chen Yuxuan poked Shishi's down jacket and said, "Don't worry, Shishi, the great philanthropist I'm talking about is definitely not the great philanthropist of the 9th generation," he said. "I'm a good person. I'm also a good person. You don't understand." Jiangchen said unhappily, "You don't understand. You don't understand. You don't understand." The two little boys, neither willing to give in to the other, began to argue. They even forgot what they were arguing about in the beginning, and stood in the aisle with their necks raised. "Shishi, let's go to the bathroom?" Lu Xiaoyu was a little worried that they would fight. She even carefully moved closer to Cece's ear, and whispered in a low voice, "Little fishy, let's run." Shishi nodded innocently. So the two little girls carefully slipped out from Lu Xiaoyu's side, leaving the two little boys who were completely unaware and very engrossed in the argument. However, when they returned home in the evening, Shishi was still a little worried. She just got in the car and couldn't help but ask, "Papa, you're not a turtle, right? Why do you ask this question?" Yang Yi was confused. Because, Papa, let me tell you, this morning, Chen Yuxuan told me that his papa said that you are a great philanthropist. Shishi felt that she couldn't finish the story, so she paused and began to tell the complete story. During this time, Lan Xian, who was sitting next to her, suddenly interrupted. "Oh, Shishi, so Chen Yuxuan and Jiangchen were arguing about this." "Yes. They suddenly started arguing." Shishi giggled at her friend. "I don't even know what they were arguing about. Then the teacher took them away." Lan Xian said excitedly. Although Shishi was interrupted, she didn't give up. She continued to talk about her worries. Chen Yuxuan said that Papa is a very good person. Then, during math class this afternoon, Teacher Lu also said that Papa is a very good person. She donated money to those pitiful teachers and gave them their salaries. She wants to thank Papa. Cece chattered and even imitated teacher Lu Xianxian as she cupped her fists. In fact, Cece's retelling was still a little lacking. At that time, Lu Xianxian had the demeanor of a hero. After praising Yang Yi's righteousness and wealth, she also sighed and said that she wanted to learn from Yang Shi's father's way of doing things. Although she didn't have money, she would regularly donate 200 yuan to the teachers in the mountains every month. She also taught the children that when they grew up, they had to have love. But she didn't listen to the rest. When she saw Ms. Lu Xianxian praising her father, she was already immersed in joy and worry. Papa, are you really a great philanthropist? Because I know that Papa is super nice, but I don't want you to be a turtle, because little turtles are very cute, but I still don't want Papa to be a little turtle. I want my Papa to be my Papa. The little girl was worried, and her delicate and sparse eyelashes were still trembling slightly. She looked a little pitiful. Yang Yi finally understood. He also knew what TV series Jiang Chen was talking about. During the summer vacation, it was a costume fantasy TV series broadcast by Shanghai TV. Because it was adapted from a web novel, the origin was a bit magical, but the plot was still very interesting. Murphy and Wu Jingjing also watched this TV series together. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he comforted the little girl. Don't worry, Dad is Dad, not something strange. Although the children's misunderstanding brought some jokes, Yang Yi more accurately understood the truth that Lans Hao Kai told him before. He was indeed not a lone wolf. His public image, good or bad, could actually affect the children. He didn't have to deliberately let the public relations team create a perfect image for him in front of the public. But Yang Yi felt that he really did need to listen to Mo Xiaowan and the others' opinions and appropriately respond to some negative news to reduce the impact of the negative impact on the children. But Chen Yuxuan and Teacher Lu are not wrong. Dad did do some good things. Just like what Dad taught you before, you have to learn to care about others and help others. The greater our ability, the greater our responsibility, so Dad also helped a lot of people. Yang Yi smiled and said to Shishi, when you grow up, Dad will take you to help others. Let's do good things together, okay? Okay. But we don't want to be a great philanthropist. Hee, I don't want to be a little turtle. Shishi first responded to her father happily, and then mischievously laughed. It seemed that the idea of a little turtle becoming a great philanthropist left a deep impression on the little girl. Chapter 1241. During the weekend, Murphy was playing with Tong Tong. She smiled and asked Shishi, who was beside her, "Are you going to the company to sing with Mom today? How about it?" Murphy's last concert of the year was scheduled for next week. Although she had returned to Jiangqing after a tour, Murphy, who had always been strict with her work, did not slack off. She ended her vacation early and went to the company to practice singing and rehearsing with the dance team every day, as if she was clocking in for work. It was a rare weekend, so Murphy did not slack off. She was preparing to go out and see if she could coax the two little guys to go to the company with her. That way, her husband could practice singing with her. However, Cece was not as easy to coax as before. She shrank back cleverly and smiled with her big eyes. Hee, I don't want to sing with Mama. I want to go to the park with Papa. Tong Tong was a little persuaded by his mother. He blinked his eyes and was about to agree when he heard his sister's words. He immediately thought of the newly developed forest park near the community. There were a lot of fun equipment there. Little Momo's mind flashed with the sounds of laughter when they went to play last week. She immediately changed her tune and opened her small mouth, cheerfully shouting, "Yes, yes, hang it in the park." He had not mastered the last word yet. He had completely imitated his sister's pronunciation. Naturally, he could not get it right. Yes. We also have to take Bao Bao to play. Bao Bao can also play with a lot of things. Little brother, do you remember? Last time. Shishi excitedly chattered with her brother. Tong Tong could not keep up with his sister's talking speed. However, he was used to not being able to understand what others were saying. Anyway, when he looked at his sister, he was also affected by her positive emotions. He became inexplicably excited and waved his little hands. Murphy looked regretfully at the two little guys who were already excited. She knew that she had no chance. She could only call Mo Xiaowan to pick her up. "I'll play with them first. I'll go over at noon and pick you up for lunch." Yang Yi smiled and comforted Murphy, who was a little hurt. Murphy pouted and said unhappily, "It's not fun. My son and daughter don't follow me anymore. All day long, they want Papa to bring them here and there to play." All right. You're in charge of me, and I'm in charge of the child. That means you're also in charge of the child. It's all the same. Are you still jealous of me? Yang Yi smiled and coaxed. Come, don't forget to give me a kiss. After you kiss me, you're not allowed to pout. Humph. Murphy purposely pouted even higher. Although she was only acting coquettishly in front of Yang Yi, Murphy still felt threatened. She felt that her position in both Xixi and Tong Tong's hearts was getting lower and lower. I have to find a way. Murphy thought to herself. I have to show Xixi and Huawu the charm of their mom. I have to show them that mom is actually more interesting than papa. Murphy sat in the car and thought about it blindly. She wanted to take back her position from Yang Yi. On the other hand, Yang Yi sent Murphy to the company in Mo Xiaozhuan's car. After that, he packed up and took Xixi and Tong Tong to the forest park to play. Of course, he also brought Bao Bao in the car. Xixi and Tong Tong got into the car first. Yang Yi installed a baby safety seat for Tong Tong. As for Xixi, she was already a grown-up, so she just had to fasten her seatbelt. Moreover, Yang Yi didn't even have to do it himself. Xixi had heard her father talk about it many times since she was young. After getting into the car, she pulled the seatbelt over and fastened it herself. However, they were both children after all. After getting into the car, Xixi wasn't so obedient. She took off her sneakers and naughtily kicked her feet, which were wearing pink socks, on the back of the front passenger seat. Yang Yi's large SUV was very spacious. The second row was adjusted to the back, and the platform between the first row and the second row was large enough for an adult to lie down flat. However, Xixi still managed to kick it. The advantage of a young girl's long legs was immediately shown. When Tong Tong saw this, he followed suit and sat in his baby safety seat. He raised his chubby legs and tried his best to kick forward. However, even though the baby safety seat increased his height and his father's driver's seat was adjusted to the back. After all, Yang Yi was also tall and had long legs, Tong Tong was still too small. He tried his best to kick, but he couldn't reach it. Hee, little brother, you can't do it. Also, if you want to kick it down, you'll have to take off your shoes. Otherwise, you'll dirty the car. Xixi laughed happily, as if she was taking pleasure in Tong Tong's misfortune. When Steamed Bun was called out by Yang Yi, he knew that he was going to go out and play. He was also very happy and jumped around beside Yang Yi. Moreover, this guy was very smart. He wanted to jump up from the second row, because he saw that the young masters were sitting in the second row. However, Yang Yi stopped him. Steamed Bun, you sit in the trunk. He opened the trunk and patted it with a smile. Steamed Bun was very intelligent. When he heard that he wasn't allowed to sit with the young masters, he lowered his head and ran back to the back unhappily. He then jumped up. Fortunately, Xixi was very familiar with it. She pulled down the armrest of the second row's middle seat and opened the curtain. She barked at Steamed Bun through the hole. Woof woof. Steamed Bun, come here. When Steamed Bun saw this, he immediately became spirited again. He wagged his tail happily and drilled his head into the hole in the middle. Since he couldn't get out, Steamed Bun adjusted himself to the most suitable position. He laid down at the back, and his head and neck drilled out of the center armrest and rested comfortably on the armrest. Hee, Steamed Bun, now you can play with us. Xixi said happily as she rubbed Steamed Bun's head with satisfaction. Little Swanee also clapped its hands happily, kicking its little legs and dancing with joy. Steamed Bun was well behaved. He looked left and right at Tong Tong and right at Xixi. He laid his head there, as if he was sleeping. His ears drooped comfortably as he entered the car mode. Murphy was practicing with the dance team that she hired today. Although she mainly sang, she still had to listen to the choreography teacher's instructions and try to cooperate with them a few times. Murphy, who was focused on her work, temporarily forgot about her troubles in the car. She even forgot about the time and practice for 2 hours. Murphy didn't come out of the dance studio until it was time for a break. This, I guessed right. Murphy was about to go drink some water and eat some fruit when she heard laughter from the pantry from afar. She walked in and saw 2 female colleagues from the company's public relations department on the weekend. They were gathered around a round table, laughing and playing a deck of cards. However, these cards weren't ordinary poker cards. Some of the cards were flipped over with beautiful cartoon drawings on them. Some were the same, and some were different. Hey. No, these two aren't the same. The girl who said confidently that they were the same now sighed regretfully after flipping over two different cards. Cover it back, it's my turn, the other girl yelled. They were so engrossed in their game that they didn't notice Murphy's appearance. Chapter 1242. The two girls were frowning as they looked at the covered cards. One of the girls suddenly felt a shadow in front of her. It was dark and uncomfortable, blocking the light. She subconsciously turned around to look. Suddenly, she was dumbfounded. She didn't know when Murphy was standing behind them, watching them play cards with full attention. How did it feel to be caught by your boss for being absent at work? She was experiencing it now. Murphy, Sister Murphy. She called out softly, then reached out her trembling hand to touch her companion. Soon, the two girls stood up from their chairs and lowered their heads in shame. One of them plucked up her courage and said in fear and trepidation, Sister Murphy, I'm sorry. We shouldn't be playing cards during working hours. It's the weekend. You're here to work overtime. Don't be so formal. Out of their expectations, Murphy waved her hand casually. Then she asked curiously, What cards are you playing? Why haven't I seen it before? Seeing that there was a turn for the better, the bolder girl quickly picked up the cards on the table and introduced them to Murphy. Sister Murphy, this is a memory card game that's been popular on the internet recently. Actually, the rules of this game existed in the past, but now someone bought the copyright of some animated images and made this card. Now it looks more vivid than before, so it's popular on the internet. She didn't say it accurately enough. The rise of the memory card game wasn't because of the animated images, but because the card was printed with many of the more classic cartoon images from the early 20th century. To the young people who had grown up now, these cards were equivalent to the portrayal of their childhood. On the internet, some people called it memory killer. Therefore, this card game received a lot of attention in a short period of time. Of course, after the touching memories created by this memory card game faded, the fever of this memory card game would soon subside. After all, there wasn't much innovation in the game. It was still the traditional memory card game that relied on memory to flip out two of the same card game. But this thing, for Murphy who didn't have much time and interest to play cards before, was a very new thing. You guys teach me how to play. Murphy excitedly sat down and pointed at the two girls opposite her with a smile. The two girls were a little scared, but they had no choice but to sit down and play the card with Murphy, trembling. The rules were very simple. Mofei only needed to try it once to understand it. Moreover, she felt that she was quite talented in this game. After flipping a few times, she actually found the same cards, but the cards that other people found were all different. The more she played, the more confident she became. Murphy actually came up with a bold idea. Of course, Murphy was not one to lose her will to play. After playing with the two girls for a while, she raised her head to look at the time. The break was over. She had to go back and continue rehearsing with the choreography team. Where did you buy this card? Can you buy me a set? When Murphy got up, she asked them with a smile. Sister Murphy, it's sold in the Saharataba Mall. A girl answered honestly. She stole a glance at Murphy and thought to herself, It's from your husband's company. Can it be delivered today? Murphy asked. It should be tomorrow. We bought it the next day because this store is in Yangcheng, the other girl said carefully. Another girl said cautiously. She paused for a second, and then suddenly had an idea and said, Sister Mofei, if you are in a hurry, you can take ours back first. Anyway, it's just opened and it's still very new. How can I do that? Murphy hesitated and asked. If I take it away, what will you do? Murphy was in a hurry. She wanted to take it out for lunch later. Hee, Sister Murphy, let's go back to work. The girl stuck her tongue out mischievously. Then she said seriously, Actually, we played it a few times and felt that it was nothing. Sister Murphy, you can play with it. The other girl next to her nodded in agreement. Okay, I'll buy yours first. If you want to play with it, you can buy it online. Mofei did not hesitate. She quickly took out a small stack of 100 yuan bills from the wallet in her bag, handed it to them, and said. The two girls saw that the small stack of bills was a few 100 yuan. They didn't dare to take it and hurriedly rejected it. Putting aside Mo Fei, who was scheming, Yang Yi took the two children to the forest park not far from their community. Because it was a park newly developed by the city government and had only been open to the public for less than a month, and because it was a park in Tingshan district with fewer people, there were not many people in the park when Yang Yi and the others came to play last week. Today there were more tourists than last week. However, compared to other established parks that were crowded on weekends, Forest Park was relatively quiet and clean. Today's weather wasn't bad. Although the winter mountain wind was chilly, the sun was bright during the day. After basking in the sun for a while, the body felt warm and comfortable. It was much more comfortable than being indoors. Although winter had arrived and the leaves were falling, the forest park was still full of greenery. There were many evergreen camphor trees, masan pine trees, and so on. The green leaves were still lush as usual, giving people a feeling of vitality. In the winter, this was indeed a pretty good scenery. Yang Yi's car was parked at the entrance of the forest park. In order to ensure the safety of pedestrians, motorized vehicles were not allowed to pass through. Bicycles were also allowed, and bicycles could be rented in the park. However, Yang Yi had two children and had no plans to ride a bike for the time being. Steamed Bun, come here. After Yang Yi closed the car door, he shouted at Bao Zi, who couldn't wait to jump up and down with Xixi and Tong Tong on the grass outside. He took out a retractable dog leash from the side pocket of his backpack. Bao Zi obediently ran over. When he saw the dog leash, he obediently lowered his head so that his master could touch his collar. Xixi and Tong Tong also ran over. The little girl saw the dog leash in her father's hand and frowned. When her father squatted down to tie it around Bao Zi, she finally couldn't take it anymore. The little girl held her father's shoulders with her two small hands and began to plead softly. Papa, can you not do this for Bao Zi? Bao Zi will be very uncomfortable. Yang Yi stopped what he was doing and smiled slightly. He asked, why do you say that? Bao Zi will lose his freedom if he's tied to this leash? Cece hurriedly nodded. Her expression was very serious as she said, that's right. Steamed Bun won't be able to play happily. My little brother used to be like this too. But other people will be afraid of Bao Zi because Bao Zi is a dog and he's so big. Yang Yi patiently explained. Cece knew that her father was right, but she was still a little unwilling. The little girl gently twisted her little butt and pouted her little mouth as she said, but Bao Bao is very obedient. Bao Bao is very obedient at home. She seemed to have thought of a way. Her voice rose slightly and she said with a little excitement, Papa, I can tell them that Bao Zi is a very obedient dog. Then, we won't have to make this leash for Bao Zi, right? Papa knows that you're very good to Bao Zi. Yang Yi smiled and stretched out an arm to hug the anxious little girl. He said softly, but we're in a public place now, so we can't do whatever we want like at home. We have to consider not only Bao Zi and our own feelings, but also the feelings of others. Papa taught you before that we have to learn to stand in other people's shoes and think for them. Just like when we go out to play, if we see a big dog that isn't led by its owner, will we be scared? Will Papa nervously pick you up? Similarly, if we don't lead it, other people may not have time to understand whether Bao Zi is an obedient dog, and will be scared by him. Their happy mood for the day will be ruined. Tell me, under such circumstances, shouldn't Papa tie this leash for Bao Zi? Yang Yi asked with a smile. She hesitated. Although she didn't nod, Yang Yi knew that she was wavering from the little girl's hesitant eyes. Look. Yang Yi smiled, picked up the retractor, pressed the button, and pulled the rope to demonstrate to Xixi. Actually, this machine is very magical. The rope can be lengthened and retracted. As long as Papa controls it well, Bao Zi won't feel uncomfortable. Xixi gently squeezed her father's arms with her little butt. She was finally persuaded by her father. In her father's arms she whispered hesitantly, Then, Papa, be careful. Don't make Bao Zi unhappy, because we're going to have a good time today. Yes. We're going to have a good time. Xixi is happy, Huahua is happy, Papa is happy, Baozi is happy. And then the other uncles, aunts, brothers, and sisters are also happy, Yang Yi said with a smile. Chapter 1243. It was quite interesting. In the forest park, what attracted Xixi and Tong Tong the most was not the beautiful natural scenery of the forest, mountain, or lake, but the simple children's entertainment facilities hidden in every corner of the park. For example, the red and green slides, the yellow-painted seesaws, the small rotating iron chairs, with yellow chairs with blue bottoms, the web-like climbing equipment that was more than a meter tall, and so on were not placed in one place. Instead, they were scattered in many places in the forest park as if they were waiting for children to explore. Xixi and Tong Tong had a lot of fun, and even ran in front while giggling. "Little brother, come here quickly. I remember that there is a big and super fun slide in front of us." Although it was already winter, and Xixi was wearing a thick coat, the little girl ran briskly, and did not look bloated and clumsy at all. The little girl's cheerful and pleasant laughter drifted away in the gentle mountain breeze, like the singing of spring birds. Tong Tong was not as agile and graceful as his sister. After all, the little guy was still young and his legs were short. He eagerly followed his sister, and was left far behind by his sister. Of course, although he was slightly out of breath while running, the little guy was still very happy. His little mouth muttered intermittently, "Good, good, fried chicken, fun flower, flower ladder." The more he muttered, the more he was motivated to chase after his sister. Yang Yi held Steamed Bun's hand and followed behind. Steamed Bun excitedly chased after the two little masters. However, he was not a good student, and was always distracted. Sometimes his attention would be attracted by a bush under a tree, and sometimes he would be attracted by a roadside trash can that was made to look like a panda. As they walked and stopped, Yang Yi could not keep up with the two children's pace. "Steamed Bun." Yang Yi could only keep calling this little guy. At the same time, he also retracted the retractor in his hand. Just like fishing, he retracted the rope and pulled Steamed Bun back. Then he loosened the rope and let Steamed Bun continue running. They arrived at the super fun slide that Xixi had mentioned. In fact, there was nothing special about it. It was just a little taller, and there was an additional barrel-shaped spiral slide. Although the highest point of the slide was indeed a little high, this section was safer than other open slides. This was because Yang Yi did not have to worry about Xixi and the others falling out of the cylindrical, opaque and transparent, space plastic slide. "Little brother, come on up." Xixi had already climbed up the stairs. Then, she stood on the 2-meter-high plank road with railings and looked out. She called out in a clear voice, "No, no, mommy is scared." Tong Tong grabbed the handrail with both hands. His chubby legs could not move when he saw his sister standing at a height of almost 3 meters. However, he did not come down. He was scared, but at the same time, he wanted to play. With so many complicated feelings, Tong Tong anxiously stamped his feet on the ground. "Sister." Tong Tong looked up at his sister pitifully. He held the handrail with one hand and extended his other hand towards his sister. "Wait for me. I'll go down and get you." Xixi's voice came from above. Then Tong Tong saw his sister's figure disappear at the top. After a while he heard his sister's muffled laughter not far away. "Haha, little brother, look where I am." Xixi scratched her messy hair, patted her butt, and jumped up from the exit of the slide. Then she waved at Tong Tong proudly. "Hey." Tong Tong had seen his sister play this slide last week, but he had forgotten about it. Now that he saw it again, he was very surprised. He ran over and put his little hand into his sister's soft palm. Then, he could not help but look up at the exit of the slide that his sister had slid out from. "That's where I slid down. Little brother, look." Xixi pointed at the slide enthusiastically and said to Tong Tong, "Little brother, let me tell you. It's super fun to slide down. It feels like you're swinging one way and the next. Then unknowingly, you're coming down. Hee hee." Tong Tong looked at his sister with admiration. He did not know what to say. He only felt that his sister, who knew how to play and talk, was amazing. At this time, Yang Yi walked over with Steamed Bun. He smiled and said gently, "Xixi, bring Hua Hua up to play." Just slide down from the highest slide. Daddy will catch you from below. Yang Yi was actually a little disappointed when he saw that Tong Tong did not dare to go up. He could not help but reflect on himself. Did he spoil this little guy too much? In his previous life he did not know when it started, but he had already survived in dangerous jungles. Not to mention this kind of slide with enough protective equipment. He had even climbed towering trees that did not have any places to put his hands or feet. Compared to the shadow of death, the fear of climbing was insignificant. As Yang Yi's son and a little man, Tong Tong should show some courage. Afraid? He would not be afraid if he practiced a few more times. Therefore, Yang Yi let Cici bring little Momo up the slide. Although in the eyes of ordinary people, it was a bit cruel to let a little guy who had just turned 2 years old play on a 3-meter-high slide, in Yang Yi's eyes, this was just a small experience. Come on, Hua Hua. You can do it. Your sister is already sliding down. You have to work hard too. Don't let your sister look down on you. Yang Yi clapped his hands and said with a smile, Shishi, you have to be careful too. You can't come down now. You have to wait until Daddy catches your brother before you slide down. Otherwise, if you rear-end the slide, you'll get hurt easily. Okay, Papa, I know. Shishi was so tall that she could stick her head out of the guardrail and respond to her father in a crisp voice. However, Tong Tong stood at the entrance of the slide and looked at the dark inside. After all, it was a closed slide. He was scared again. No, sister, don't play this. Tong Tong turned around and grabbed his sister's trousers nervously. He said pitifully to his sister, But Daddy said you want to play. Shishi scratched her head and said awkwardly, But I'm scared. Hua Hua is scared. Tong Tong was shaken. He looked back at the slide and then looked up at his sister with his big eyes for help. Hua Hua, come on. You're a man. What are you scared of? Daddy's voice came from below. After hearing her father's hint, Shishi gently grabbed her brother's hand and persuaded him. Brother, you're right. You're a man. Don't be scared. Then it's really fun. I won't lie to you. If I lie to you, I'm a puppy. I'm a steamed bun, okay? Papa is waiting for you downstairs. After some persuasion, little Swanee finally sat on the slide. He was about to hesitate and turn back to ask his sister for help, but his little butt slipped and his whole body disappeared into the slide all of a sudden. Yang Yi didn't know what Tong Tong experienced in the mysterious slide. He only saw his little figure passing through 2 transparent slides. Soon, Tong Tong dizzily slid out of the slide. Not bad, not bad. You're very brave. Don't you think it's not scary at all? In fact, it's quite fun. Yang Yi hurriedly bent down to help the little fellow who had just gotten up and was still unsteady on his feet. His mouth was full of questions. However, the scene in front of him almost made Yang Yi burst out in laughter. When Tong Tong got up from the ground, his hair, which hadn't been cut for a long time, stood up one by one. It was just like the hairstyle that was very popular in his previous life. The principle was simple. It was already dry in the winter, and the slide was made of plastic. When he slid down, the static electricity produced directly made Tong Tong's hair stand up. Shishi also had static electricity, but her hair was too long and too heavy, so it didn't explode like Tong Tong's. Steamed Bun seemed to be frightened by Tong Tong's hairstyle. He first moved closer to him. Then he was scared and retreated. Luckily, the smell was still his little master's. After confirming, Steamed Bun moved closer and licked Tong Tong's little hand. Little Momo was completely unaware. The spiral slide made him a little dizzy, as if he was drunk. He stepped on the grass with one foot and then the other, but the little guy was no longer as scared as when he came down. Instead, he liked the feeling of being swung around in the slide and laughed foolishly. Shishi received her father's instructions and slid down the slide. When she saw Tong Tong, her father was taking pictures of Tong Tong with his phone. She noticed that Tong Tong's hair was a little strange, so she looked at it curiously. What's wrong with little brother? Shishi muttered. However, before her father could answer, Tong Tong impatiently reached out his little hand and held his sister's hand. The little fellow who had recovered his strength grinned and said excitedly, Sister, let's go there and play." He pointed at the slide that he had just slid down. It was obvious that the little guy had forgotten his fear and was addicted to playing. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.